Alley. Baumgardner. Bellinger. Blasey. Bowers. Clays. Corson. Dietrich. Dahl. Erickson. Fagg. Falscadeau. Francisco. Gossage. Haley. Holland. Holscher. Kirshen. Close. Longbine. Masterson. McGinn. Olson. O'Shea. Peck. Peterson. Petty. Pittman. Pyle. Reddy. Reichman. Schallenberger. Steffen. Straub. Sykes. Thompson. Tyson. Ware. Warren. Wilborn.
Senators, we have a guest chaplain with us today. He's actually related to another frequent guest chaplain, Doug Hinkle. Please welcome Pastor Greg Fletcher. He's from the Deerfield Methodist Church and the Lydia Church.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we need to give you thanks for the creation you have entrusted those that occupy the seats inside these chamber walls. We ask that you give them what it takes to be the best stewards of that creation. Lord, I pray that the individuals in this room are working together, searching for your wisdom and find your guidance to ensure all decisions made stay in alignment with your scriptures. Father, bond the relationships in this building, and may they be intentional to work in harmony during these times that could be the toughest in the history of our state. Our motto translated says, "To the stars through difficulties." I pray that everyone here will look hard at those words along with Scripture and figure out how to be inclusive and not divisive. Please send the Holy Spirit to work inside these chamber walls and give encouragement to all involved that will enable them to make the best and right decisions for this precious part of creation. Please provide help to this group of men and women as they plan and plot to do what is best for the people of Kansas. Father, as we just concluded a wonderful week of celebrating the sacrifices that you made for us over 2,000 years ago, may we be in the same spirit to serve you and find the purposes you have for this part of Kansas government. Please work in the lives and hearts of those that make this chamber. Give them insight and wisdom to make tough decisions for the future generations of this great state. With your help, they will harmonize and deal with today's issues in a way that glorifies you and lifts this state to a level that will be recognized by others in this great country and around the globe. Finally, Father, I ask you be with the families of all members of this chamber. Please wrap your comforting arms around them and protect them, as they are an important part of everyone here today. Father, I ask all of this in your Son's precious name, Jesus Christ. Amen. To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Introduction of original motions and Senate resolutions. The clerk will read.
Senate Resolution number 1753 by Senator Dietrich. A resolution recognizing Chuck Torrance for his outstanding service to the state of Kansas and congratulating him on his retirement.
Senator from Shawnee, Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the reader read?
A resolution recognizing Chuck Torrance for his outstanding service to the state of Kansas and congratulating him on his retirement. Whereas, since January of 1990, Charles Chuck Torrance has been dedicated to serving the needs of legislators, support staff, and visitors to the Kansas State Capitol And whereas Chuck is very knowledgeable about the history of the Kansas State Capitol from its origins to present day, he has assisted with the needs of many throughout its most recent renovation. And whereas whenever legislators or staff needed assistance, they were often told, "Ask Chuck." And whereas year after year, Chuck has put in many long hours ahead of the arrival of the legislative body. Each year, Chuck worked tirelessly to have everything ready on time. And whereas a tall task Chuck undertook was manually labeling and rearranging the voting boards atop a tall ladder, which Chuck was pictured doing one year in the Topeka Capitol Journal. And whereas Chuck's commitment to integrity during his interactions with all staff and conducting legislative business stems from the influence of his father, Elon Torrance, and his sister, Mary Ann Torrance. Elon covered the Kansas legislature for the Associated Press for many years, and Mary Ann is a former reviser of statutes. And whereas the Torrance legacy of service to the great state of Kansas ends with Chuck as he plans to retire from the Kansas State Legislature in the summer of 2024. Following his retirement, Chuck plans to spend time golfing, traveling, and keeping up with the University of Kansas Jayhawks alongside his wife, Carol. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate of the State of Kansas that we recognize Chuck Torrance for his outstanding service to legislators, support staff, and visitors to the Kansas State Capitol, and congratulate him on his well-deserved retirement.
Senator from Shawnee, Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, as you can tell from the resolution, Chuck is retiring this summer and leaving behind a very strong legacy of service to all of us who've worked at the Capitol or visited the Capitol over the past 30-some years. He is our go-to guy for anything and everything that has to do with our offices. He's the master key person. He manages all the work orders. He answers the call when our offices are too cold or too hot. He knows where the furniture is stored, which is some kind of a big secret. He also frames our tributes and resolutions. He managed all the movement of the furniture and people during the renovation of the Capitol over several years, and he does 100 other things that we just don't even know about. Chuck is so personable and so willing to help. He can tell you, "No, Senator, we cannot do that," in the kindest way. Chuck, you are a legend. We're grateful for your service, your dedication, your helpful demeanor. You're going to be greatly missed, but I believe all of us may have your cell phone number. Mr. President, could I yield to the Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Blasey?
You may. Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to also echo a lot of the words that were just stated about Chuck. When I was on staff here in the Kansas Senate for 5 years, Chuck was one of the people I called very often to take care of the needs of the Senate. He was one of the instrumental people behind the scenes that never sought recognition, but today he deserves that recognition because he was truly one of the people that kept this great institution operating. And so I'm very grateful for your many years of service. And Chuck, you will be extremely missed. I can guarantee that. And I also want to just recognize his sister, Jill, who everyone knows in the revisor's office, who also serves our state very well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Shawnee, Senator Dietrich.
Thank you. Chuck, we wish you well in your retirement. We hope that you remember us as fondly as we're going to remember you. With Chuck today is his wife, Carol, his sister, Mary Torrance, who left a lasting legacy as our revisor. Colleagues, could you please join me in applauding Chuck and his outstanding service to the state of Kansas?
Senator from Shawnee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move an emergency be declared, the rules suspended, and Senate Resolution 1753 be adopted by voice vote.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Chuck, when they told me you were going to retire, I thought, he can't be retiring. I remember when his mother retired, and that means I've been here too long, right? No, you're one of those friendly faces that I've just really appreciated in the Capitol. I enjoyed when I had an office up on the 5th floor, and you were nice and convenient for me to connect with. So thank you for your service to the state. On a point of personal privilege, Chair recognizes the Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President.
We will actually stand at ease for just a minute so your people can get in and be duly recognized. We'll return to order. On a point of personal privilege, Chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to thank you for your attention this morning and on this very special occasion as we recognize a truly great Kansan, the late Colonel Roger H.C. Donlin. He was the first recipient of the Medal of Honor during the Vietnam War. He passed away January 25th of this year in Leavenworth, Kansas. And we have in our VIP section today with us, joining us here on the Senate floor, his widow, Miss Norma Donlin, if you want to raise your hand and be recognized for a moment, and Colonel retired Mike Neer and his wife June, as well as Roger and Norma's granddaughter, Justine Donlin Jeske, Jordan Donlin, another granddaughter, Jackie Flores, Deborah Crater, Kevin Reagan, Art Fillmore, and Pat Warren. We also have in the West Gallery joining us, I want to recognize Terry Buckler. He's the president of Special Forces Association, Chapter 29, and Frank Goss and his guest Betty, as well as Amy Nooch. So thank you all for joining us here today. And before I begin reading the citation of the award of Medal of Honor, I wanted just to tell you a little bit about the Medal of Honor and what it means to America and our country. It's the United States' highest award for military valor in action. The first Medal of Honor was awarded in 1861. And since then, there have been 3,536 Medals of Honor awarded. 618 of which were awarded posthumously. During the Vietnam War, there have been 235 recipients of the Medal of Honor. Today, again, we welcome here the widow of one of those recipients of a Vietnam Medal of Honor, Mrs. Donlin, her family and her friends and colleagues to here at the Kansas State Capitol. They were honored previously today in the House of Representatives, and we're honored to have them here in the Kansas Senate. We're here to honor the legacy of her husband, the late Colonel Roger H.C. Donlin, and a truly remarkable Kansan, I will tell you that. Our family has personally known the Donlins for the past 10 years or so, and have included even a birthday party. I think our son was about 5 years old, and they had a special birthday cake for him and all at their home. So it means something to our family, certainly, and to the state of Kansas, the service that their family has provided. Colonel Donlin was also the first Special Forces member to be a recipient of the Medal of Honor. Today, as we pay tribute to Colonel Donlin, I would like to read an excerpt from his Medal of Honor presentation ceremony. This is from December 5th, 1964. So that's nearly 60 years ago. And I will read you the quote. Remember, this is an award from the United States Congress. And it begins, Mrs. Donlin, Senator Hayden, Senator Keating, Senator-elect Kennedy, Secretary McNamara, ladies and gentlemen. This is a proud moment for all Americans. We are here today to present the nation's highest honor to Captain Roger H.C. Donlin, United States Army. On July 6th of this year, Captain Donlin was the commanding officer of the United States Army Special Forces Team A726 at Camp Nam Dong in the Republic of Vietnam. Under cover of night, a reinforced Viet Cong battalion launched a full-scale attack on the camp. A violent battle took place lasting 5 hours. The Viet Cong enemy used mortars, grenades, and very heavy gunfire. Captain Donlin was wounded 4 times, in the stomach, in the leg, in the shoulder, and in the face. Wounded though he was, Captain Donlin directed a successful defense of the camp. He moved from post to post and man to man within the camp perimeter. Despite his multiple wounds, Captain Donlin with great courage and coolness inspired the American personnel and the friendly Vietnamese troops to a successful defense of their camp. No one who has seen military service will fail to appreciate and understand the magnitude of Colonel Donlin's heroic performance under enemy fire in the darkness. This Medal of Honor, awarded in the name of the Congress, is the first such honor to be bestowed upon an American military man for conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty in our present efforts in the Republic of Vietnam. Next week, here in the state of Kansas, Governor Kelly has proclaimed April 10th, 2024 will be Colonel Roger H.C. Donlin Day. And while we celebrate the military accomplishments of Colonel Donlin, he also achieved many awards, honors, and accolades during his lifetime. But he considered his 2 reconciliation projects in Vietnam as his contribution to heal the wounds of war. Both he and his wife, Norma, believe that those who have invested the most of themselves in war should be the first to reach out in peace. Above all his accomplishments, Colonel Donlin his most lasting accomplishment, I think he would tell you if he were here, is the everlasting love he shared with his wife, Norma, of 55 years. Little did the 2 of them know that when they first met on an airplane in November 1965, that moment would be the spark that started a love affair that would last infinity and beyond, I think they would say. Colonel Donlin was known as a devoted family man who loved his daughter, 3 sons, and his 6 grandchildren. He was a humble man, so he would not probably agree to let me say that he was a true American hero as well. So, but he will always be remembered for his devotion to his family, his deep faith in God and his church, his patriotism, and always a friend and mentor to those with whom he came in contact. So colleagues, thank you for your indulgence and your time and your attention today. And if we'll give a round of applause to our special guests here today. And I would be remiss if we didn't also, if I may, Mr. President, if we have any veterans who are here in the Senate gallery or on the Senate floor, please rise and we can give them a round of applause as well. Thank them for their service.
That's a wonderful idea. If there are any veterans that would stand, that'd be great. We are and will be eternally grateful for the sacrifice made for you and your family, for both of you. So thank you for your service. We're deeply honored to have you with us today. We're now ready for final action on yesterday's CCR. On this roll call, we'll take the following: the Conference Committee report on SB 455. Clerk will read the title.
Senate Bill number 455, an act concerning electric public utilities.
Clerk will call the roll.
Alley. Baumgardner. Billinger. Blasey. Bowers. Clays. Corson. Dietrich. Dahl. Erickson. Fagg. Fauskido. Francisco. Gossage. Haley. Holland. Holscher. Kirshen. Cluth. Longbine. Masterson. McGinn. Olson. O'Shea. Peck. Peterson. Petty, Pittman, Pyle, Reddy, Reichman, Schellenberger, Steffen, Straub, Sykes, Thompson, Tyson, Ware, Warren, Wilborn.
Has every senator had an opportunity to vote? We will hold for, I know, for at least the senator from Johnson, Senator Warren, to come back in the room. And I'll take any explanations of vote. Any changes of vote? You don't need to hurry, Senator. Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren, it's on 455.
Aye.
Any further changes or explanations? Seeing none, clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Thirty-six having voted in favor and none opposed to the passage of Senate Bill 455, this measure having reached its constitutional majority hereby declared passed. This time I'm appointing Senator from Montgomery, Senator Peck to replace Senator from Lyons, Senator Longbine, Senator from Saline, Senator Clay to replace Senator from Butler, Senator Fagg, Senator from Douglas, Senator from Holland to replace Senator from Johnson, Senator Holscher as Senate conferees on House Bill 2097. Before recessing, are there announcements? Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Fed and State will be conferencing with the House Commerce on our conference committee on all bills in conference upon recess of this morning's session. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Lynn, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm afraid to use a microphone. Who knows what it'll be edited to say that I say, but I wanted to announce that we do have a tax conference committee at 11 a.m. and we will be conferencing on the agree to disagree. Thank you. And room 112. Thank you.
Senator from Johnson, Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Health Conference Committee will be meeting regarding the Senate Bill 287 at a time to be announced. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Seeing none, Chair recognizes the Majority Leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate recess till 2 p.m.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We're in recess. Messages from the House. Clerk will read.
The House adopts the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 359. The House adopts Conference Committee report on House Bill 2481. The House adopts Conference Committee report on House Bill 2527. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2588. And the House concurs in Senate amendments to House Bill 2607 and requests return of the bill. The House announced the appointment of Representatives Humphreys, Lewis, and Osmond as conferees on Senate substitute for House Bill 2070. The House announced appointment of Representatives Smith A., Bergerkamp, and Sawyer as conferees on House Bill 2097. The House adopts the Conference Committee report to agree to disagree on House Bill 2465 and has appointed Representatives Smith A. Bergerkamp and Sawyer as second conferees on the part of the House. The House concurs in Senate amendments to House Bill 2577 and requests return of the bill. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on House substitute for Senate Bill 387. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 18. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 384. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 356. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on House substitute for Senate Bill 73. The House adopts the Conference Committee report to agree to disagree on Senate Bill 438 and has appointed Representatives Thomas, Estes, and Stogsdill as second conferees on the part of the House. And the House announced appointment of Representatives Thomas, Estes, and Stogsdill as conferees on Senate Bill 19.
On an agree to disagree, Chair recognizes the Senator from Miami, Senator Baumgartner, on 438. Senator from Miami, you're recognized to agree to disagree on 438.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adopt a conference committee report on Senate Bill 438 to agree to disagree and request a new conference committee be appointed.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. At second conferees on part of the Senate, Chair appoints Senator from Miami, Senator Baumgartner, Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Erickson, Senator from Johnson, Senator Sykes. Before recessing, are there announcements? Senator from Johnson, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to take a moment to recognize some visitors in the gallery from the Olathe East Civics Academy. So if you would, wave to us. These are individuals, like I said, from Olathe East. They are part of the Civics Academy, learning about our government and here to visit and maybe looking at taking our jobs someday. So give them a round warm of applause and welcome them.
Welcome to the Kansas Senate. Civics in action, right? Further announcements? Seeing none, Chair recognizes the majority leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Republicans will caucus upon recess in 5:48, and I yield to the Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Democrats will caucus in room 287 North upon recess. I yield back to the Senator from Cali.
Senator from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate recess to the sound of the gavel.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We're in recess.
On an agree to disagree, the chair recognizes the Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on House Bill 2070 to agree to disagree and request a new conference committee be appointed.
You have heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. As second conferees on part of the Senate, the chair appoints the Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren, the Senator from McPherson, Senator Wilburn, and the Senator from Johnson, Senator Corson. Conference committee reports. The chair recognizes the Senator for Butler, Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on Senate Sub for House Bill 2036, and I'm glad to explain.
You may explain your motion.
This is the tax plan, the more comprehensive tax plan. I'll just give you the kind of the components of it, and then we can talk about it in the backstory. So first, it moves the reduction in state food sales tax up to July 1, which has been in many things that we've seen. It also, it retains the progressive tax structure of 3 rates, but it drops the top rate to 5.5. On the bottom, it raises standard deduction to 5,000 single, 7,500 head of household, 10,000 married filing jointly. It does remove entirely Social Security as taxable immediately in 2024. And on property, it does the $100,000 exemption on the 20 mills for residential housing, which we've also seen in a few proposals, as well as drops the 20 mills for schools to 19.5 mills. The additional thing it does have the privilege tax piece that we have also seen many times over. And then additionally, it abolishes the LAVTRF, the local ad valorem reduction fund, and the city county revenue share fund, which are two, that what kind of been kind of scams in our budget for the last 20 years where we think it's there, but it's really not. So it formally removes those. Those are the components, a little bit of history. Obviously, we've had multiple plans. You know, this body has passed 4.75 tax rates, 5.15. We've been at this a while, right? So, and I don't think there's anybody in this room that doesn't know how much I value a single rate structure. That is by far the best structure for our state. However, I understand the process and where we are, and it became abundantly clear to me after 2 years of fighting for that. I honestly thought components like Social Security, which we all agree on, things that would be strong enough, but I came to the full realization there are at least 14 people in this chamber that are so committed to that tax structure, we weren't going to let the people have the Social Security piece without maintaining the progressive structure. So I was looking for the component that would at least get us started. And so they've graciously conceded to lowering some rates and then giving these components. This truly is a compromise plan in every sense of the word. You think of it, we maintain the progressive rate, but we lower rates. So that's give and take. Social Security, that by the way, Social Security, I don't know how that got flipped to the other side of the aisle. That's been a Republican position in this chamber for a long time. It was our gubernatorial candidate's position in the 2022 elections, right? It was, matter of fact, that in and of itself was a compromise in the sense that passing this body, our position was not taxing retirement. And we've backed off to only Social Security. So that's a win. And on property tax, finally getting some good property tax relief. Now, we passed, and I would love to have seen the constitutional amendment. I think it was 1611, right? That would have been the limiter on the increases in property tax. We sent that to the House. They chose not to process it. So this is a good step forward in every sense. And then the banks and the food, those are things we've kind of all agreed on all along. So it's just time. It's been time. And so in the true spirit of compromise, this is a plan that I think meets the end of the day, and I'm glad to stand for questions.
We are now ready for questions, and a reminder, you may stand asked 2 times. Chair recognizes the senator from Douglas, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I do want to thank Senator Masterson because I know how near and dear to him the single rate structure is. And I do appreciate his good faith effort to compromise, to provide tax policy to, to the citizens of Kansas. I'll be voting no against this, Mr. Vice President, for really 2 reasons. And I'll dive into my more technical ones first, because I think from a tax policy standpoint, Mr. Vice President, I think for the constituents of the Senate 3rd District, while it does address some of their needs, I think it wildly misses the mark in one of the most tax policy areas I have the most concern with in this state is residential property taxes and how they rise year after year after year after year after year. And make no mistake, I know we can kind of take a step back and say, well, it's a tax bill that, not everybody's happy, so I guess that's a good work product. When it comes to residential homeowners, and I can't speak for the rest of the state, Mr. Vice President, but I will say my perception, at least what I'm hearing from my constituents, which are primarily in Northeast Kansas, as I said, this wildly misses the mark. When you look at the actual property tax relief of what you're getting between lowering the 20 mills and then raising that residential property tax exemption from 40, whatever it is, up to $100,000 on a $250,000 home, and by the way, I did confer this with Eddie and legislative research, that's $141 tax savings. Have you all looked at your property tax bills the past 5 years, and how much they've gone up? I would contend, Mr. Vice President, regardless of if you live in Northeast Kansas, or if you live in Western Kansas, or if you live in South Central, residential property tax increases have gone up much more, probably each year. I know for me they have, more than $141. Now, we have had some good, thoughtful debates in Senate tax. And, you know, I disagree with some of my colleagues on that thing, but I think we've all kind of come to agree, and I don't want to speak for others, but just we have some structural problems with the way we assess valuations on different classes of property. And the problem we're having is that, particularly with our higher growth areas, you are seeing residential property owners getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. This doesn't get rid of the squeezing. This, in my mind, is kind of half a Band-Aid where the sore is still festering. In fact, I think if this is using the Band-Aid analogy, the residential property tax wound, most of that sore is still gaping and it is weeping. It's not a pretty sight. Which leads me to come back to the whole perception of the package. I do appreciate the Senate President's strong reluctance to get off of the single rate bandwagon. I'm glad he took that compromise. But Mr. President, Vice President, I got to be candid to the body and the citizens of Kansas. For the life of me, I don't know why we got knotted up in our shorts over the whole income tax piece to begin with. My constituents have not been beating on me about, God, you got to give me a higher standard deduction, or God, you really got to lower that highest marginal rate. Because to me, that's what's been a problem with the process. The bundling has allowed the state chamber and those who have got to lower that highest marginal state income tax rate, that has been their mantra. I think it is a chaotic journey to stupidity, but that's what they want to go. I know we can't get them off of that. And this to me was the bone, well, at least we'll lower your highest marginal income rate 0.2. And let's be real clear about this, Mr. Vice President. This isn't about trying to do good tax policy for W-2 wage earners. This is about basically pass-through income earners. Very high dollar individuals. They're not corporations because they've chosen basically to set up a company structure through an LLC. And so they're getting their benefits, okay, and they're having to pay their taxes, okay, on the standard K-40 just like every other working Joe. And make no mistake, those high-level earners, they take lots of deductions and expenses, okay? So when you look at their effective tax rates, they are much lower than a W-2 employee who would just might have to be the same gross earnings as that pass-through income earner. So when you look at basically the cost of this overall bill, and once again, we can talk about, yeah, and if you really believe we needed to lower that top marginal rate for the wealthiest pass-through earners, okay, that's your belief. But to me, what we're doing is burning money, and we could have taken those dollars, Mr. Vice President, and we could have put that into more rich, expanded, targeted residential property tax relief for our homeowners across this state. And the thing that I find particularly most galling about this bill is that also it gets rid of the LEVTRF. Now, I understand the history of the LEVTRF and why the legislature hasn't funded it, because it hasn't had the money to fund it. But I can tell the body, Mr. Vice President, that in my district, I got buku emails from a lot of folks, okay, up in Leavenworth County, the part of my district, and they were all over my rear because it's like, why aren't you guys funding LEVTRF? And I know and I understand the property tax pressures that those Leavenworth County commissioners are facing. They got a lot of federal property up there. They got to provide services for a lot of federal employees. Okay, and they don't have a tax base to support that. So once again, surprise, that gets squeezed off onto the residential property tax owners. And what this bill basically says is, here, take your $140 of your so-called property tax relief, okay? We don't even have this stuff indexed for inflation. I mean, come on. Take your $141. We're getting rid of LEVTRF because the message here is that here's your $141. This will fix your problem, okay? This is ignoring the structural flaws we have in assessing properties in this state. And Mr. and Mrs. Jane and John homeowner, okay, you're going to keep getting squeezed, but we want you to shut up, Because if we get rid of the VTRF, then that's our proclamation that there are no structural issues with the taxation formulas here in the state of Kansas. So I do appreciate this body's good work. But once again, I got to get back to one more other comment here I want to talk about is the process. I was very complimentary of the Senate president when he basically opened up the floor that Thursday, and I complimented the public. I thought it was great because he threw down the Donnybrook. We had all these bills that we could have put different tax policy pieces on. He gave that to us, and I appreciate that, Mr. Vice President. But I will also tell you, after Senate Bill 300 came over from the House and it got ruled material altered, and I'm happy with that. I don't have a problem with that. I was really hoping, Mr. Vice President, that your tax conference committee could have put separate tax vehicles out on the floor, okay, of what these members wanted. Here's a bill for Social Security. Here's a bill for residential property tax relief. Here's a bill for income stuff. Here's a bill for state sales tax exemptions, okay? We could have done that in the conference committee and run that across both chambers, not have the results go back to conference, just have these bodies weigh in, yes or no. If they want to amend it, rock and roll. But no, the special interest didn't want that. And so once again, the governor's office, Republican leadership offices in both chambers, here's our bill again. Because at the end of the day, the special interests are driving our leadership. And I get it. But that's why I can't vote yes on this bill, is because we're satisfying the special interests again. We haven't let the people's representatives weigh on each of these very important tax topics individually. And so we kind of got this pile of mush. I appreciate the body's indulgence. I hope that we reject the acceptance of this conference committee report. I want to go back to conference, and I want the conference to basically develop and let go individual tax bills where we can weigh on it instead of having to basically make compromises as well. This was our leadership's position, this is their leadership's position, and okay, flip a coin, whatever. This, to me, is a very horrible way to make tax policy. I appreciate the body's indulgence. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Chair now recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm going to start off. I want to thank for having the Social Security in here. I've been here a long time. First time I seen that amendment, Senator Brown brought that. We couldn't even get 5 hands for a roll call vote. It seems like everybody's supporting that today. That's a good bill. These seniors have paid their taxes on that when they earned that money. They shouldn't have to pay taxes twice on the Social Security. So I'm glad that's in here. The standard deduction, I like that. It's in this bill. When you look at the states around us, we got one of the lowest standard deductions with the states around us. I can name them, but I'm not going to take my time to do that. But again, that's a great thing. I think the child tax credit, it's another great piece. The property tax exemption, when I started this year, I wanted 100,000 at 20 mills. That's what I was shooting for. Dropping it to 19.5 mills, that's great. That's going to give people back home more property tax relief. That's more than either bill started out with. I think that's a really good piece. I've seen some versions where it was down to 18%. I really liked them, but I'm happy with what we've got here today. Probably the thing I have the most heartburn about is the tax rate on the top tier, dropping it 0.2% and not doing anything for the other brackets. I get that they itemize more at the top, but you've got some people that have a lot of health care issues with special needs kids and they fall into some of them other brackets. They're probably going to itemize. They're not going to get them deductions. But you can't win everything. And at the end of the day, this is day 80. We're getting towards the end. Don't need to be here this summer. There's a lot of good pieces. I mean, we're a high property tax state. But you know, one of the things I wish we would do, because we talk about this state and that state's tax rate, you know, the only state around us that has a flat tax is Colorado. They also have a local tax. You know, we ought to put a spreadsheet together of every state and all their taxes, their property tax, their standard deduction, standard exemption, so we can really compare apples for apples. No one talks about Missouri has 10 brackets, or I think Oklahoma's got 5, and I think Nebraska's got 6. You know, they don't talk about, you know, only when we want to have a discussion real quick, we talk about the tax rates of maybe the corporate, or like Texas, they have no income tax, but they don't talk about the inventory tax. It's 2.5%. I bet you that's probably about equal to our income. Just for debate, discussion, I think it would be good we talk about apples for apples. But I'll tell you, overall, the bill I liked the most was the amendment the minority leader brought, but I think this is as good as it's going to get, and I'm going to support this today. Like I said, my biggest heartburn's the 2/10, but at the end of the day, I think this is a pretty good compromise by all the people. I mean, my former president, she always talked about making sausage. Well, I think there was a lot of sausage made. I applaud the Senate president for giving up on his positions on things and coming to the middle on some of these. And, you know, so today I'm going to support this bill and support what you guys have done, and try to move this ball forward for Kansans, because that's what we're doing it for them to win. And, you know, there's probably some holes in here that some people will get missed, but I don't see how. Everybody should see some kind of tax relief in one way or another. And $1.4 billion given back. And I also see in this bill, we're not going to be in a position where we're not going to have money in the future. And hopefully you guys can work on more tax relief and give the people more. So I urge the body to support this conference committee report. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Just a couple of comments on the tax bill. Number one, I commend the leadership team and the tax conference committee on their work. I know it was a lot of work to get there. We are oftentimes accused of not compromising enough, and clearly this is a compromise measure that many didn't like. I'm on the record as voting for more than once for the single rate, flat tax, whatever you want to call it. I believe it was better, because the reality is those people under the top rate weren't going to pay income tax. So that ship sailed. We lost that politically. And so where do you go from here? If you're going to give income tax relief, it's got to be off the top rate. There is no other way to give substantial income tax relief. We talk about giving a tax break to the rich. Well, let's define rich. So if you make $15 an hour and you work 40 hours a week cooking at a local fast food joint, you're rich in Kansas, because you're going to make $30,300. Now, if you work for the state of Kansas, our minimum wage is $15. So you can't work for the state of Kansas and not be rich. So if you're going to provide income tax relief, I guess we're giving it to the rich. I'm going to talk a minute about property tax. I hate property tax. Everybody else does. There's no question it is the most hated tax there is. But property tax is local. And we sit here and we talk about local control, and we don't want to take local control, but the reality of it is all property tax is local. I've argued with our tax chair on this floor many, many times about property tax bills because it shifted it from residential to commercial or industrial, or it artificially capped residential, which then would shift it to So a number of property tax proposals have gone across this floor. The reality of it is property tax is not going to get lower until locals spend less money. And if we are charging you enough in your income tax and your sales tax to send you money back on your property tax, we're charging you too much money on your income tax and sales tax. I'm taking money from your right pocket and putting it in your left pocket. So until the locals spend less money, property tax is not going to change. But for those that want to go to their local units of government and say, I want my property tax lowered, part of that equation needs to be what services I'm willing to have decreased. And when those conversations happen, then you may get some movement on property tax. But we as the state who rely on income tax and sales tax cannot charge more than we should to offset what the locals are spending. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman or Vice President. I do plan on supporting this bill.
Chair now recognizes the senator from Riley, Senator Reddick.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just want to say I stand in support of this bill. I think there was a lot of conversations from the very beginning of the session till now, and I do think this is a good compromise. I promised my constituents we will, at the end of the session, give them tax relief with income tax, sales tax, and property tax. And I believe this bill does all of that. In addition, it addresses families with children, singles, married couples, seniors, and homeowners, the whole gamut, instead of singling out just the seniors or just the individuals that are military veterans or whatever it might be. It's everybody. So everybody's going to see some kind of tax relief. And I think that's what I can take back to my community and have them support this as well. Is it everything I want? No, but our work is not done. I'm sure we are going to be discussing a lot more bills in the next, at least today and tomorrow, and figure out what other ways we can help our communities. But this is something, a package that I fully and completely support. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the senator from Leavenworth, Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I do want to stand in support of this particular bill, this compromise. I think we all woke up and heard what the House did over there when they had 123 votes to 0 on a fantastic compromise that even that I could have agreed with. This bill, when we look at the write-ups, does deliver all those things my colleagues just talked about. Nearly 300, over a 3-year time period, nearly $300 million in property tax savings. Nearly $70 million in food sales tax savings in this year alone. $54 million towards child and dependent care credit for our working families out there. For the elderly, $400 million of tax savings. And then we look at the income reduction, we're looking at $600 million. That's a $1.4 million. And this is fiscally responsible as we look at our budget. Some of the other packages for myself were a little bit too high, but this is in the range I think we can sustain over the next 3 years, and if we can't, we can adjust. So I do stand in support, and I commend the leadership for working towards this. Thanks.
Chair now recognizes the minority leader from Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This entire legislative session, we've been focused on one thing, and that's providing substantial tax relief for all Kansans. With our property tax rising, child care becoming more scarce and unaffordable, so many families struggling, all of us can agree that we need to cut taxes. This bill is a compromise that includes key pieces of the governor's proposal. It cuts state property taxes for Kansas homeowners, immediately eliminates the state taxes on Social Security income, axes the state sales tax on groceries by July 1st, and it provides relief for working families in need of child care. It also provides an income tax cut through rate reduction and includes the largest standard deduction increase in any plan that has passed this session. But most importantly, this bill doesn't threaten the progress on the issues that Kansans care about, like our public schools, our law enforcement, and our infrastructure. By protecting the three-bracket system, this plan maintains revenue elasticity and keeps our state on fiscal sustainable path forward. While this isn't my perfect plan, this is what compromise looks like. This proposal benefits all Kansans, and it includes ideas from both Republicans and Democrats. This has been a difficult and divisive legislative session, but I think with this plan, we can show our constituents that we can come together and do the right thing and cut taxes for all Kansans. So I support this.
Are there other questions or comments? Seeing none, I turn to the President of the Senate, Senator Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you for the comments. It is in the spirit of compromise. When everybody's modestly uncomfortable, we're probably in a pretty good spot as we move forward, and we all had to give quite a bit. I would say for those comments, the only comments that were negative, like about the LAVTR, I would comment that one of the reasons the removal of LAVTR was in there because the bill to abolish that passed the House 123 to nothing. Right, so it made sense to put it in here as well. But other than that, I just want to thank everybody for the broad support. Appreciate the working together. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I've made the motion and we're ready for final action.
You have made the motion. We will hold for final action. We are now ready for final action. On this roll call, we will take the following. The Conference Committee report on Senate Sub for House Bill 2036. The clerk will read the title.
Senate substitute for House Bill number 2036, an act concerning sales taxation.
The clerk will call the roll.
Alley. Baumgardner. Billinger. Blasey. Bowers. Glaze. Corson. Dietrich. Dahl. Erickson. Fagg. Fascudo. Francisco. Gossage. Haley. Holland. Olsher. Kirshen. Cluse. Longbine. Masterson. McGinn. Olson. O'Shea. Heck. Peterson. Petty. Pittman. Pyle. Reddy. Reichman. Schallenberger. Steffen. Straub. Sykes. Thompson. Tyson. Ware. Warren. Wilborn.
Has every senator had the opportunity to vote? Does any senator wish to explain their vote? Chair recognizes the senator from Douglas, Senator Holland.
Mr. Vice President, I'd like to be able to submit some comments at the end of the session, explain my vote for 2036.
Please proceed.
No, I want to submit them.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Holzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. An explanation of vote. I know there are a number of Democrats who may not love parts of this bill. I know there's a number of Republicans who may not love parts of this bill. So that makes me think we have a collaborative effort. So there are great parts in this bill that I think each of us can talk to our constituents about that they will be happy about. And as somebody who worked intimately on the tax plan a few years ago, collaboration is key in making sure that you get a good product to the finish line. So I am happy to support this bill. Thank you.
You wish to have your words spread across the journal. Thank you. So duly noted. Are there any other explanations of vote? Are there any changes of vote? Seeing none, the clerk will close the rolls and tally the vote. "38 having voted in favor, 1 against. House Bill 2036, the measure having received the required constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed. Messages from the governor. The clerk will read.
Senate bills numbers 331, 360, 362, 381, 433, and 491 have been signed. Approved April 4th, 2024. Respectfully, Laura Kelly, the governor.
Before recessing, are there announcements? Seeing none, excuse me, the chair recognizes Senator from Sherman, Senator Bellinger.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senate Ways and Means and the Veterans from the House has a conference committee at 3:30 in room 548 South. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Senate Fed and State Conference Committee with the House Committee on Modernization will meet after this next set of conference committee reports here in 144 South, followed immediately by another conference committee with the House Commerce Committee. So we're going to have back-to-back conference committees after we finish this next round here on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Chair now recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senate Judiciary and House Veterans and Military Affairs will meet at 3:45 in 582 North on Senate Bill 292. Thank you.
Are there other announcements? Seeing none, the chair, chair recognizes the Senator from Miami, Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate Education will be conferencing on Senate Bill 438 in 10 minutes.
Are there other announcements? Seeing none, the chair recognizes the Majority Leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Republicans will caucus at 4 p.m. in 548, and I yield to the Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Senate Democrats will caucus at 4 p.m. in our room 287 North. I yield back to the Senator from Cali.
Senator from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I move the Senate recess to the sound of the gavel.
You have heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion carried. Senate is recessed.
Conference committee reports. Chair recognizes Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Peterson on SB 359.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 359. It's our annual license plate bill. It has the Kansas City Chiefs, Sporting KC, KC Royals, Kansas City Current, Sedgwick County Zoo, Topeka Zoo, Support the Troops, and First City of Kansas. It contains 359, 2498, and a portion of 130, which puts the county designation on all plates designed after January of 2024. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for the Senator from Sedgwick. Senator from Douglas. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. So my understanding is at this time, the Royals have identified their Kansas City Royals Foundation to be the recipient, which had not been the case when we first heard that bill. Is that true?
Senator from Sedgwick.
That is true. That was in the House version.
Senator from Douglas. Okay. Any further questions for Senator from Sedgwick? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. Chair recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson on 2532.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adopt the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2532.
Please explain.
Thank you, Mr. President. House Bill 2532 would amend the Kansas Parimutuel Racing Act to credit revenue generated from wagers on historical horse races to the Kansas Horse Breeding Development Fund and the Horse Fair Racing Benefit Fund. It would take those and break it up to 1/3 of the tax revenue generated from the wagers on the historical horse races would be credited to the Kansas Horse Breeding Development Fund, and 2/3 would be credited to the Horse Fair Racing Benefit Fund. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Questions for the Senator from Johnson? Seeing none, Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm adding 1/3 and 2/3. So my understanding is that there would be no revenue to the state off of these wagers.
Senator from Johnson.
It would go into these two funds. That's correct. And there's no money in these funds right now. And the regulation costs would also be absorbed by these associations once the funds started flowing. So there'd be no FTEs to the state or no cost to the state, basically.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll hold for final action. Chair recognizes Senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine on 2560.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adopt the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2560.
Please explain.
2560 is a combination of three bills. The base bill was the abandoned application bill that passed our body 39-1 a couple of weeks ago. The OSBC brought that if a application is deemed incomplete for more than 90 days, they could determine it void. And also if an application is approved and there's no action for 18 months, then that application could also be voided. In conference committee, we had a bill earlier in the year that was gutted that had a provision in it that would allow foster children between the ages of 16 and 18 to open a bank account. So we inserted that DCF language into 2560. Also in this bill, or in this conference committee report, is Senate Bill 406, which was the Money Transmitter Act. A slight change on that. We exempted small mom and pop payroll processors from being included in the Money Transmitter Act, and the OSBC was agreeable to that. And then we also had House Bill 2105, which passed our body 38-2. We put some additional language in there clarifying no cost on transactions that would allow for a 2-day waiting period, but there would still be a transaction fee and tipping available on same-day transactions. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for the Senator from Lyon. Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Faust-Guido.
Thank you, Mr. President. A question for the Senator from Lyon. If he would please repeat, he said foster care children, a bank account. What bill was that he mentioned? Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Lyon.
It was House Bill 2247. Before 2247 was the UCCC bill.
Further questions for Senator from Lyon? Seeing none, we'll hold for final action. Again to the Senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine on House Bill 2711.
Thank you, Mr. President. House Bill 2711 once again has three different bills in it. The base bill was the CAPERS working after retirement, where we changed the wages from $25,000 to $40,000. While we debated that on the floor, we also included the death benefit increase from $4,000 to $6,000. The House had not seen that, but we were able to keep that in the conference committee report. Also, and our vote on that was 38-2. We also have a bill, Senate Bill 37, that this body did not see, and that is the Foreign Adversary Investment Act, which would require state agencies, including CAPERS, to divest from 6 countries that are considered foreign adversaries. It gives them 2 years to divest, and this bill has a 5-year sunset on it.
And then it also included Senate Bill 23, which was the alternative investment capers bill that we had. Our version of it had 20% cap. The House eliminated all cap together, and so the conference committee agreed at 25%. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for the senator from Lyon, Senator from Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the carrier of the CCR stand for question?
He is.
Thank you. I would ask, he made a statement that it was not a bill that this chamber had seen on the foreign adversaries when we actually passed that language last year. Does the good senator from Lyon remember?
Senator from Lyon.
I do not.
Senator from Lynn.
So I will remind the body that it was a floor amendment last year to divest all foreign adversary investments in capers within 18 months. It passed this chamber. I think the final bill had a vote of 29 in favor. It was a high margin, and it went to conference committee, not FI&I. I think we sent it to the wrong committee. He might have defended it last year because the House pulled it out. They did not want that language. So it was quite disappointing that they made us wait a year and now are saying that it's the House position when the Senate actually took that position last year. Even though I appreciate the senator putting the language in, I do have some concerns over the 25%. Wasn't that the initial place as where the Senate started in negotiations on alternative investments?
Senator from Lyon.
No, actually, the cap that was in statute was 15%. The Senate position was at 20%, and the House was at 0%, and so we arrived at 25%.
So if I may, I'm sorry, Mr. President, my question being, what was the original bill that the Senate started with, and we negotiated on the floor to 20%?
Senator from Lyon.
Give me just a second here. Mr. President, it was Senate Bill 23, and we passed it 24-13.
Senator from Lynn.
Thank you. My question was, what was the original percentage for the alternative investments?
Senator from Lyon.
15% is what the statutory cap was, and the Senate raised it to 20.
Senator from Lynn.
Thank you. My question is, what was the original position in the bill? It was much higher in the original bill, and we came down to 20. That's what I'm asking.
Senator from Lyon.
The original bill, as introduced, removed the cap at all, removed the cap completely.
Senator from Lynn.
That was my point. And so I want to thank the chairman for defending the Senate position that, you know, there's a little bit of good in here. The body's got to decide, do we take the good with the bad? It seems like that goes on a lot. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further questions for the senator from Lyon, Senator from Reno.
Thank you. I would like to kind of rehash the whole history of that alternative investment. And I don't have all the details, and as such, I'd appreciate the help of the carrier of the bill. But my understanding was the limit originally was like 10% or so, and they got upside down and lost all sorts of money. And can the carrier of the bill help us with that past history?
Senator from Lyon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I certainly can. In the early 90s, the legislature decided that they should use, I can't tell you the exact percentage, but it was noticeable. It was 10% or 15% that we should use that to fund economic development projects in Kansas. And they went way upside down. And so the future legislature established caps, which has been moved up, I believe, 3 times to the current 15%. And then we had a bill last year and we had a bill this year to raise that cap on alternative investments.
Senator from Reno.
Thank you very much for that. And again, you know, short summary is that this is potentially very dangerous investing. It's inherently risky. It's inherently illiquid. And the people who voted for this in the recent past and people who vote for it today, you're going to own it. You're going to go own it into the future, and you're going to own the results of it. To me, it's not wise conservative investing, and I will continue not to support this. 1/4 of capers potentially being in these risky, illiquid investments. Thank you.
Further question from Senator from Lyon, Senator from Miami, Senator Baumgart.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My question is, at any point in time when you were working with the House, was there any discussion on Senate Bill 479?
Senator from Lyon.
Could the Senator from Miami tell me what 479 is?
I sure can.
Miami.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 479 was a bill that was introduced, and it was supported by, co-sponsored by several members of this body. It had a hearing in early March and was kicked out of Senate Education Committee. It was where it would take those that, teachers that were in the negotiating group of our public school districts, as well as the community and technical colleges, and those that were in Tier 3 would be moved up to Tier 2. And that was in part spurred by this promise that was made 4 years ago that addressing Tier 3 and perhaps moving people back into or up into Tier 1. And then 2 years ago, that promise was made when a new group of folks in the House were elected. And then we had the legislative post-audit that really brought to light just how poor Tier 3 was. So my question, the reason I asked that question is while I support the bills that are in HB 2711, this is missing. And the reason I asked specifically if that was addressed is once that bill came unanimously out of Senate Education and it got read in, it was assigned not only to Ways and Means, but it was assigned to your committee.
Senator from Lyon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 479 was not discussed. There were discussions among the conference committee acknowledging the fact that Tier 3 has some problems and that we continue to want to have a joint committee that would study Tier 3 effects and make an ultimate recommendation to the legislature.
Senator from Miami.
I appreciate that response, but part of what was shared during our hearing and committee discussion before passing the bill out was that to wait another year would incur a significant expense. To wait another year would cause another significant expense, and that on a regular basis during the interim, there in fact is a committee that meets. And so I guess my question is, how long will we wait before something will happen? Because, you know, Mr. President, there are very limited means when a bill comes out of committee and then it's reassigned not to one committee, but to two. I guess if we were to try on the floor, which happened last week and a couple weeks before, to bring a bill out of committee requires 27 votes. And this would be an effort to try and pull it up out of 2 different committees. So one of the things that I have heard from teachers that are in Tier 3, what I have heard from superintendents, having every new employee be under Tier 3 is not an incentive. They list that as the number one reason for the quick turnaround. And so at what point is a promise that's going to be a top priority be a real priority?
Senator from Lyon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have the ability to set the agenda.
Senator from Miami.
Well, I think what's interesting is while we certainly understand the issue with regard to the funds in countries of concern with regard to the Disinvestment Act, when we are talking about the death benefit, which I supported and voted in favor of when it was before the body prior, most all of the folks are increasing the pay from the $25,000 to the $40,000. When we're looking at increasing the pay $25,000 to $40,000, for the most part, those are individuals that were in Tier 1 or Tier 2. So I urge this body to, would I love to see a vehicle to have us really do something with Senate Bill 479? It had an opportunity in Senate Education, and we had the hearing, and we kicked it out. It went to 2 other committees, and there it died. It died not once, but it died twice. So I urge this body to not ignore our legislative post audits and not ignore the concerns of others. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Johnson, Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't remember the time frame, but I want to say it was around 2010 to 2012 when we visited Capers and put Tier 3 in. You know, I was here originally when I started, it was Tier 1, then it went to Tier 2. You set a date way out into the future. When someone comes on, they know the benefits they're getting, the tier they're going to be in, and what their benefits is going to look like when they retire. If you take people that are now, then we moved to Tier 3, we were in very tight times. We wanted to look to build something that was sound, something that was going to have a pension that was there, because for a long time we've seen our pension underfunded or not funded at such a high level. And so when I think Senator King and others worked on this plan, it was, to me, it was all the fractions of this chamber and the other chamber looked at every angle over time, very in depth, and they built the cash balance plan. If we stick with the cash balance plan in the future, somewhere we will have our pension fund balanced. Tier 1 and Tier 2 are the biggest part of that unfunded. It's not Tier 3. Now, we drew that line in the sand. We gave them a couple of years, and people coming on, they knew the benefits they were getting. In the world, the benefits have changed from where they were 20 or 30 years ago. We tried to match that at the state. I know I was part of other entities. We copied the cash balance plan at that pension program, set the date, you know. And the one thing I seen after 5 or 6 years, how that plan was about 99% funded on the cash balance piece. All of our unfunded was the old. And over your 40-year amortization, you'll work that out. But if you go and create and move a bunch of people into Tier 2 that are Tier 3, that knew the plan when they started, you're going to create billions of dollars in unfunded liability, and the tax cut you just passed will be a tax increase bigger than the one the tax decrease you just passed. And it'll be a big challenge for this state, and we'll go on into the future with a big liability. And things have changed. There's not as many pensions as there used to be. Pensions have changed, people move around, but I mean, before you go past something, and I've heard a lot of members talk about this, that we need to move everybody back into Tier 2, I think that's a very dangerous move. I hope you guys in the future study it and really think about, take a look at what they did back when they changed it and made the tier 3, because you can get yourself real quick back to the situation we were in. And, I think we're going forward at a very slow pace in a better situation. And I'd hate to see that course reversed and have this big unfunded liability. When them people, we drew the line in the sand. That's how you do it. You don't change your pensions for the people that already have them. They're under that. But the people that are new hires, they're in that next tier. That's how it works. And so I hope this body thinks about that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no further questions, Senator from Lyon, Secretary says, I failed to receive my motion on 2711 up front. Do you mind?
Well, the Senate Secretary and I have had conversations about that every year for about 10 years. So I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on House Bill 2711.
You've heard the motion and the debate and the question and answer. We will now move to the Senator from Lyon. We'll hold for final action on 2711. We'll now move to 2787. Senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine.
Thank you, Mr. President. House Bill 2787 was the Guaranteed Insurance Act bill that covered P&C. It passed our body 40-0 a couple of weeks ago. The House had a version that was identical to ours, only it covered life and health. So we combined those both into 2787. The House bill was 2810. It passed 120-0. And so that's what 2787 is.
I think I failed the motion on the front of that one too. How about we do that and then we'll stand.
But I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on House Bill 2787.
You heard the motion and the explanation. Are there questions for the Senator from Lyon? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. We are now ready for final action. On this roll call, we'll take the following. Conference committee reports on SB 359, House Bill 2532, House Bill 2560, House Bill 2711, and House Bill 2787. Clerk will read the titles.
Senate Bill number 359, an act concerning motor vehicles. House Bill number 2532, an act concerning insurance. House Bill number 2560, an act concerning financial institutions. House Bill number 2711, an act concerning retirement and pensions. House Bill number 2787, an act concerning property and casualty insurance.
Clerk will call the roll.
Alley. Baumgardner. Billinger. Lazy. Bowers. Clays. Corson. Dietrich. Dahl. Erickson. Fag. Falscadeau. Francisco. Gossage. Haley. Holland. Holscher. Kirshen. Cluse. Longbine. Masterson. McGinn. Olson. O'Shea. Heck. Peterson. Petty. Pittman. Pyle. Ready. Reichman. Schallenberger. Stefan. Straub. Sykes. Thompson. Tyson. Ware. Warren. Wilborn.
Has every senator had an opportunity to vote? Senator from Douglas, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Mr. President. No on 2560, no on 2711. Aye on the balance.
Any further explanations or changes? Seeing none, clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. Thirty-eight having voted in favor and 1 opposed to the passage of Senate Bill 359. 33 in favor, 4 opposed to House Bill 2532. 35 in favor, 4 opposed to House Bill 2560. 30 in favor, 8 opposed to House Bill 2711. 39 in favor and none opposed to House Bill 2787. These measures having reached their constitutional majority are hereby declared passed. This time, I'm appointing Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Erickson, to replace the Senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine. Senator from Shawnee, Senator Dietrich, to replace the Senator from Butler, Senator Fagg. Senator from Johnson, Senator Sykes, to replace Senator from Holscher, or Senator from Johnson, from Senator from Johnson, Senator Holscher. Sorry, that was so hard to get out. As Senate conferees on Senate Bill 19. Before recessing, are there announcements? Seeing none, Chair recognizes Majority Leader from, Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, I've had a minor brain cramp there. We're going to delay our conference committee, Fed and State, with House modernization until after this next round of votes, and then we will immediately move at adjournment of that committee then to our conference committee with House Commerce on all bills in conference, both in 144 South. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Johnson, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. The plan is to conference with House Veterans and Military Affairs with Senate Judiciary 15 minutes after third recess of the second chamber in 582 North on Senate Bill 292, and with Senate Judiciary and House Judiciary on all bills in conference 30 minutes after third recess of the second chamber in 582 North on all bills in conference. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Seeing none, Chair recognizes Majority Leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Republicans will caucus upon recess in 548, and I yield to the Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Senator from Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Democrats will caucus in room 287 North upon recess. I yield back to the Senator from Cali.
Senator from Cali.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate recess to the sound of the gavel.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senate's in recess.
Senate will come to order. Conference Committee reports. The chair recognizes Senator from Miami, Senator Baumgartner, on House Sub for Senate Bill 387.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Senate Bill 387 is the school funding bill for this next year. It also has some components in it that include policy for this next year and beyond. I'm going to start off by just talking in general about where we are as far as our schools and as far as school funding and what it is that we have within this bill. So currently, the estimate is that we have roughly 457,582.7 kids in our public schools, in our 286 school districts. Starting just yesterday, after we had finished the conference committee work, it was interesting because just a few, I would say about an hour or so afterward, maybe it was 2 hours after, there were already all kinds of pieces of information about how we were slashing school funding and we were destroying special education. And, you know, that seeps through. I received an email this morning that said that our governing body needs to stop robbing money from our local schools. I received another email that said that what's happening with funding is hurting children. I'm glad to provide many more reasons, such as kids being housed in rooms with paras with no instruction. Is that what we want in our state? I think we can all agree that's absolutely not what we want in our state. And I would say that's a violation of not only state law, but it's a violation of federal law if we have special education kids that are housed in rooms with paras receiving no instruction. So let's talk about real numbers beyond just what is our head count. Let's talk about what is the school funding for this next year. What we have in this Senate bill is an increase in funding, the CPI average, in addition to the special education increase, takes us to $309 million new dollars. $309 million for this next year. That is just in the school funding formula. What it does is it takes base aid up to $5,381, and that is an increase. It's an increase of $293 per single student waiting. And I remind the body that just because you have 850 kids that are attending a school, that is not what the waiting is. It could be double or triple that. For the following year, the estimated CPI Midwest increase will be 4.5%. That will take our base funding up to $5,623. That combination would be $535 increase over the course of 2 years just on that. But we have other areas of funding as well, areas that often are ignored. In fact, I would say are always ignored when we talk about money that's going to our schools. I'll start with something that's very popular. It started in 2012 in our state, and that was at that time, it was Senate Bill 155. It was so popular, it's still referred to as Senate Bill 155. It's the Career Tech Ed current enrollment funding. This last year, it was $39.9 million from the Board of Regents for that. The request was an additional $3.3 million because of the popularity and the participation. We also are funding $13.5 million for the MHIT, the mental health proviso. Later, either tonight or in the morning, we'll be able to discuss the Kansas Opportunity Scholarship. We voted on that last week. That's an additional $300,000 available for dependents of K through 12 teachers. In just a little bit, we'll be talking about head count and what we voted on again last week, and that's allowing school districts next year to use current year enrollment for head count or the average of the 2 prior years. That's another roughly $4.7 million. Why do I mention that? Because that is an additional roughly $67.7 million going to our schools. So bottom line, this was asked in caucus. I'm sure you discussed it. For those across the aisle, I'm sure you discussed the bottom line. We're talking about when we consider state general funds, other state funds, children's initiative, and federal funds. We're talking about $6.482 billion. And guess what? That figure doesn't account for those others that I mentioned. Doesn't account for the more than 40 million that's coming from KBOR and so forth. Other components of this particular bill, of Senate Bill 387, is establishing the Education Funding Task Force. In 2027, our funding formula expires. So it creates a task force, and they are going to begin the work. I anticipate as soon as the task force members are identified, voting members as well as ex officio, they will begin during the interim this summer and continue until we get to 2027. It also addresses something that is probably, it's interesting when people are screaming, and I mean literally because we've heard the shouts here in the Capitol in weeks prior about fully funding special education. Last year and the start of this year, what we heard repeatedly is fully fund to 92%. What was lost in the reality is it's to be a state average of 92% of excess cost, not individual school districts. Also lost in the discussion is because school districts either provide their own special education or are members of co-op or an interlocal, the way in which the funding from the state is dispersed is not even. We have some school districts that have received not only more than 100%, we had a couple school districts that if you were factoring just what they were receiving, it exceeded more than 1,000% of their excess cost. Yet we had other school districts that were receiving less than 30% of excess cost. So what does this really mean when we say that we're adding $77.5 million to special education? It means that schools will continue to receive the $168 million attributed to special ed aid that must be used from special education. It also means that that will be distributed in the normal way that it's being distributed this year, last year, and the years prior. And what we know is that is pretty messed up and broken process. But for the additional funds, the $77.5 million, the Department of Education is going to determine in a more equitable way how to distribute that. We already know that school districts that provide their own special education do not receive as many funds distributed than those that are members of co-ops or interlocals. Now, The one participation Senate Education had on this is I did challenge our new deputy commissioner to come up with something that's just no, because the position of the State Board Education was no change in SPED funding for 4 more years. Now, why would we continue to add money into a broken formula? So I challenged him, look at it with fresh eyes, and let's start coming up with some solutions for making things more equitable. The Senate Education Committee did have a hearing on that, and he did explain a process that he felt would be the first step in more equitable distribution. Another requirement has to do with a local option budget, and that is specifically with regard to special education. Lost in all of the emails that you have received, don't control LOB, don't take local authority away from LOB. Lost in the discussion is the fact that right now, since 2017, at-risk LOB funding has always been transferred in every school district into the at-risk fund and is to be used only for at-risk services, which are services above and beyond what's to happen in the classroom. Not just that, but the bilingual funds, that $46.8 million budgeted, that comes to a total of, when we multiply it by the 31.5%, equals the 15.4 million LOB, it equals the 61.9 million that's distributed to school districts. That also is placed in the bilingual fund. So that is LOB money identified for bilingual. That's placed in the LOB bilingual fund in every school district and can only be used for bilingual services. So the change and the fury is that, guess what? We're going to move to do the very same thing with special education. It goes in there right now, that LOB funding, which is $168 million, that is to be for special education. Districts are only transferring between 40 to 60 million into special education funds. You see the difference? 40 to 60 million as opposed to the 168 million that's distributed. What that means is school districts that don't transfer into the SPED funds are using the SPED LOB any way they want to. So if you've heard about school districts that we've had to shift funds over into SPED, I would venture to say some of those already are the funds for LOB. Why does that matter, and why should the legislature have a say? Well, let's talk a little bit about where those funds come from. So we have 286 school districts. Of that, 233 school districts get supplemental state aid, SSA, and that helps for the equity of property tax. We have 97 of our school districts that at least 50% or higher of their LOB comes from SSA, comes from that supplemental state aid. In fact, we have one school district that has 86% supplemental state aid in receipt. So what we are also doing in this piece of legislation is that we're not just doing a statewide, we're not just factoring what the statewide excess cost is, but every school district will have their excess cost determined That's never been done before. There are other components of this piece of legislation. It includes a pilot program for at-risk student accountability plan. There will be 10 school districts that will participate in it. That's different from what was the original House position. They were having all 286 school districts start. This has been delayed. It has language with regard to school building disposal. Those have to be buildings we've made quite clear. Those have to be attendance center buildings, not a shack, not a building that's been abandoned for years with no students attending, but the criteria is just for those that have been attendance area. We made adjustments with regard to the reporting as far as at-risk funding. We also authorized continued enrollment for certain students and gave authority for students to be determined to be not in good standing. And we adjusted the virtual state aid and KSHA virtual student participation. So it's not a requirement that the student must be a full-time virtual or part-time virtual. They can be counted for a smaller portion of an FTE. So, Mr. Chair, I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report.
You've heard the explanation. You've heard the motion. Are there any questions? Chair recognizes the minority leader from Johnson, Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I will be short because the carrier did a very detailed look at this bill. I do have some concerns, and actually I do think in conference we were able to make some of those positions a little bit better, but my areas of concern is special ed. This is an entirely new section, and we didn't really get to dig into this in committee. And the Senate Education Committee, we really do our homework and dig in to the details on this, and I think it really needs a better look at this. And just to be sure, this bill does fully fund the base state for ed, and it has that increase of the $75 million, as the carrier said. But I do think it is important to say that last year alone, $423 million of our base state aid and LOB were transferred from the regular students into the SPED. And there are some concerns in this. I wish we had been able to dig into this in Senate Education, because I do think we would have had a better product. And on that piece alone, there was one proponent of oral testimony for it and 99 opponents. So again, this is the base for funding. Again, I have talked on this, I think, for the last 4 years, that I don't think we should put policy with our funding for K-12, and we should put that in the appropriations process as we've done in the past. And one of those, the MHIT, mental health intervention teams, and the Senate position, we have always shared that those dollars should be opened up for not only our community mental health facilities, but also our FQHCs and things like that, and that's the Senate position. And I do think we're going to get that into the budget, but that just shows about when we pull out and target funding and then we're switching it around, we could lose some of these pieces that are very near and dear to us, making sure that our children are served. So again, I stand in opposition. I do wish we had been able to dig into this in the Senate, because I do think we do a good job in education. And so with that, I hope everyone votes how you feel, but this is not what is best for our students. So thank you.
Chair now recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Holzer.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I also have several concerns in regard to this bill, and some of it has to do with the calculating of LOB, and we've talked a lot in this chamber about property taxes. And one of the issues brought up by opponents to the bill mentioned the negative impact, or actually the impact this could have to raising property taxes in the future. So I think that is something we all need to be concerned about. This bill narrowly passed the House, partly because of the different pieces that had not been thoroughly through the process. Additionally, it's been labeled a Frankenstein bill because of that cobbling. From what I can tell, all education experts and professionals oppose this bill, so I do hope that the body rejects it. Thank you.
Does the senator from Miami care to opine?
I will simply say, first of all, thank you to my ranking minority for, I would concur. I think that our committee does good work. We work bills and we take our time to work and come through bills. This bill was passed out of the House committee and only voted on last week. So we were not able to have a hearing on this. With regard to the concerns about the LOB and how we're counting, just want to be clear, it's 77.5 million additional funds going to special education. And with the consensus revenue estimate, we think it might be as much as 82 million that will actually be going. So to me, I'm looking at the component of we are not hurting our schools. We are not violating Gannon. We are helping our schools, helping our teachers. We are providing funding that exceeds that 300. We're getting close to 400 million additional dollars that are going to our schools for just next year.
Chair now recognizes the senator from Wyandotte, Senator Petty.
Thank you. So there are just so many pieces within this bill that I would say have not ever been discussed on the Senate side, and either in the Senate Education, which Senate Education Committee does attempt to take a thorough look. I'm particularly referring to the at-risk accountability pilot or plan, and then a student cohort pilot program. And that program alone raises, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of concern. It is a pilot, it is with 10 school districts, but it seems to be unclear whether, when you're talking about a cohort for third grade, whether that's a cohort per building, or is it for the district, the same thing? So there'll be two cohort groups that a lot of decisions would be made on performance. And I think those kinds of new things like that with a lot of unanswered questions need a lot of thorough vetting. And that just adds to my overall concern for this bill, particularly when it looks at using the local option budget as reflecting state funding when it comes to special ed, which is a deviation from what we actually have done when we're talking about what is actually state money and what is actually being raised at the local level. That does impact property taxes. So I am a no.
Are there other questions? Does the chair wish to opine?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would simply add that with regard to the pilot, that was something that I had urged, that was something that I had introduced when we were in conference committee to slow and delay the process so that it could really, the kinks and the problems could be worked out. Obviously, with us having nearly 40 school districts that have fewer than 200 students, it's going to be really difficult to have two different cohorts. Some school districts would not have a cohort of 10 students in the third grade. So that's how you work out anything that might be problematic. And they will be reporting, I believe, to not only the school funding task force that would be formed, but would be reporting to the Department of Education. What I'm not concerned about is that reporting as far as what's being done with the at-risk funding. Because the components as far as providing longitudinal information, that has been in law for years and it's never been abided by. It's never been enforced over by the Department of Education. So I think that this is going to help nudge the process that the funding really is to go for above and beyond. Part of the concern that I've always had is we have almost $730 million for at-risk funding. And the Department of Education really can't tell us how much of that is being misused, where it's going toward salaries for regular classroom teachers, not for those that are providing the above and beyond services. You know, it's interesting, they said, well, you know, that would account for the time in which the classroom teacher does a separate pullout. But I would challenge, if a school district is paying 50% of a teacher's salary and benefits out of at-risk funding, how are they able to teach the classroom for the full time and give 50% of their time of additional separate pullout for the at-risk kids? It's just not possible. That would mean that the other children in the classroom are on autopilot while the teacher is giving attention 50% of the time for the at-risk kids. So I think it's going to allow the Department of Education an opportunity to drill down and help quantify and help assure that those funds for at-risk kids are going to be used appropriately for above and beyond services. Am I to close now?
Chairman, the senator from Miami has given an explanation. She has made the motion. We've answered questions. We will now hold for final action. Now I look to the senator from Sherman, Senator Billinger, on Senate Bill 18.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senate Bill 18 was come through this chamber a week or so ago, and it was has to do with the deferred maintenance of our universities, and we put it into a shell, Senate Bill 18, and the House has passed this out of their committee with a vote of 86 votes in favor and 37 opposed. We had passed this earlier, 34-6. Nothing has changed in the bill. It still has $30 million for the universities over a 6-year period starting in 2026. There was one change, and the change that was made was the $10 million on the deferred maintenance, or on the demolition. We agreed with the House to lower that to $5 million. So that was the only change that was done in the conference, was lowering that to $5 million, and the 2.7 for the community and technical colleges, and Washburn Tech are still there. Everything else is the same, like I said, except for the $5 million that we did give up to the House. And with that, I move that the Senate adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 18, and I stand for questions.
The senator from Sherman has given an explanation and has made the motion. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. I now turn to the senator from Sedgwick, Senator McGinn, on Senate Bill 384. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senate Bill 384 primarily deals with the emergency medical services, the staffing of ambulances. This bill ran across our floor and passed 39-0, I mean. And when the House got it, there was a lot of confusion because of the variance language and things like that. And then there was some other things that ended up getting stripped out that was current law. So after we went to conference and explained some of the pieces that we had in there, we had a very good discussion, and they understood what the intent of the bill was. And what this bill does, basically, It allows a two-man or two-woman crew to be able to operate an ambulance service going from facility to facility in counties under 30,000 people. And they do have to have a driver that's CPR certified. The individual in back has to have an EMS certification. But then they can take them from a nursing home to a nursing home, a hospital to a nursing home, critical access to a larger hospital. And then they also have the variances ability in there as well. Also in this bill, it has Senate Bill 162, which 162 passed this body 34-5. And this has to do with the Nuisance Abatement Act for Crawford County as well as Riley County. This is a bill that 3 years ago we had on the floor, and Sedgwick County requested it. They have areas, mostly in unincorporated areas, that they were having trouble with that were close to cities in trying to clean up certain areas. And so Riley and Crawford counties both decided they'd like to have that. Sedgwick County came back this year after 3 years because the sunset was put on there and said that they never even had to execute the components of the law. It was just a tool in their toolbox, and the reason they didn't have to is the word got out in the community that they had the ability to do that, and so everybody ended up cleaning up the nuisances that were upsetting neighbors. So that's that bill, and I believe I'll just at this point stand for questions.
Thank you, Senator McGann. We've changed up the order a little bit. You've gave the explanation. I'd like to have a motion now, and then we'll go to
I move the Senate adopt a conference committee report on Senate Bill 384.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Chair recognizes the senator from Wyandotte, Senator Petty.
Thank you. And this is a question for the Senator from Sedgwick. In this bill, you mentioned the change under the Emergency Medical Service Board of those three items. The ambulance is providing an inter-facility transfer. The transfer is from a county with a population of 30,000 or less, and the driver of the ambulance is CPR certified as relating to the fact that both EMS, both people on the transport would not have to be EMS certified. Do those three items, do they all have to be in effect, or are they singular, so that if the ambulance is providing an inter-facility transfer and it's in a community that's larger than a population of 30,000, does this impact them as well as a county with a population of 30,000 or less?
This only impacts counties that are 30,000 and less.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Chair recognizes Senator from Barton, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I was on the committee and listened to the conference committee on the part of this that involves the emergency medical service. And I believe that the EMS board has granted a number of variances for counties that are not fully staffed or not able to staff an ambulance with 2 certified EMTs. Could the carrier of the bill certify that or confirm that the EMS board has granted some variances already?
She will.
That is correct. They have allowed 7 variances, and I think there's 5 more in the pipeline. What this bill does by going to the 30,000 and below, we have like 600 and I don't know, 25 cities maybe and 105 counties. So everybody has to go through that variance process. So what this does is takes care of those counties, 30,000 population and less, and allows these interfacility transfers so that they free up other people who are experienced and have training at EMS so that they would be available in the event that there was a car accident or someone was having a heart attack or something happened in their home.
Senator from Barton, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do those variances not apply to emergency situations? And are those variances just for transfer from facility to facility?
Senator McGinn.
This bill is specific to facility, but if you applied for a variance, I suppose you could ask for whatever you wanted and whatever the EMS board would allow you to do.
Senator from Barton, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe that current state statute states that there need only be one operator of an ambulance, and that's the reason why last year I had introduced a similar bill, but different from this in the fact that that bill would have only required one certified EMT, because in a lot of our rural counties, we have 80-year-old citizens driving our ambulances because they are the only certified people at the time that might be available. So in an effort to try to help those rural counties in my district, I had introduced legislation to make it so that those counties could operate with one certified EMT in the back of the ambulance with the patient and one person driving the ambulance who has CPR or first aid. I still don't think that this bill gets us quite where we need to be, and it doesn't fully solve the problem. And actually, I think it almost complicates the statute somewhat more. I will support the bill, but we still haven't solved the problem. And if you are driving across western Kansas, I would imagine that, and if you were in an automobile accident, I would imagine that you would want emergency providers to arrive at the scene as quickly as possible. So anyway, I think we still have some work to do on this. Thank you.
Senator McGinn, do you care to opine?
I just would like to share that this comes in effect, publication of the statute book. So you have until July 1st until December 31st of this year to see how that works in your communities. And if you don't like it, for all those of you that come back, you'll certainly have that opportunity to change it.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. We'll now look to the senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine, on Senate Bill 356.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. 356 is our insurance mega bill. It has 5 insurance bills in it, all of which pass this body 40-0. It has the examination cost bill in it, the group funded and work comp pool bill, the risk-based capital bill, the electronic and prior authorization bill, and the title insurance with real-time payment. As I said, all 5 of these bills passed our body 40-0. So, Mr. Vice President, I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 356, and I will stand for questions.
You have heard the explanation. You have heard the motion. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. We now turn to the senator from Miami, Senator Baumgartner, on House Sub for Senate Bill 73.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. House Sub for Senate Bill 73 is going to look very familiar to you because it's actually absolutely identical to Senate Bill 386 that we passed out of this body. It is our school funding head count. What this bill does is it allows school districts this next year to use current year enrollment. And for 1 year, this next year, it allows school districts that have declining enrollment to use the average of last year or the year prior. And so I will move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on House substitute for Senate Bill 73.
You have heard the explanation. You have heard the motion. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. Before recessing, are there announcements? Seeing none, Chair recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senate Judiciary will meet with House Veterans and Military Affairs Committee for conference on Senate Bill 292 at 7:10 p.m. in room 582 North. Then at 7:15 p.m., Senate and House Judiciary will conference on all bills in conference in room 582 North. Then Senate Judiciary will conference with House Corrections on all bills in conference at 8 p.m. in in room 582 North, and we will see you there. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Senate and House Education Committees will conference on SB 19 and 159 South upon recess of the second chamber. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We will be conferencing with the House Committee on Modernization and 144 South upon recess, followed by the conference committee with the House Commerce immediately thereafter. So Fed and State, looks like we're in action here very shortly.
Are there other announcements? The Chair recognizes Senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine. Thank you. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Move the Senate recess till 8:30 p.m.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The Senate is recessed. Come to order and back to that business of conference committee reports. The chair recognizes the senator from Sedgwick, Senator. Oops, she's not here. Senator recognizes the senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine.
Will I do, Mr. Vice President? I'm here.
My apologies.
House Bill 2562 should be familiar to the body. That was the Vulnerable Adults Securities Bill that we passed 38-2. The conference committee combined that with House Bill 2101. And I need to apologize to the body. We kind of had a mix-up on the CCR on that. It did come out of committee. We did add amendments to it, but it did not run across our floor due to the fact that the committee report got lost and was turned in on the last day of last week. Senator Warren in committee put, or 2101 is the real estate contract for deed bill that gave the buyer some protection. And then we put some amendments on it in committee to protect the seller in case the buyer did not pay. We were able to get the House to agree to those amendments from the Senate committee. We also had an amendment in committee that would allow a cease and desist order on unlicensed realtors who were basically wholesaling properties. When we conferenced with the House, they added language on racial covenants, which was a bill they passed last year with 115 votes. And so, Mr. Vice President, I move the Senate committee, or the Senate adopt the conference committee on House Bill 2562.
You have heard the explanation. You've heard the motion. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. The chair now recognizes the senator from Sedgwick, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. House Bill 2570 is the unemployment insurance bill. We made a few technical changes in conference committee to conform with the U.S. Department of Labor requirements. That verbiage was fairly benign, and there were a couple of changes on the rate schedule. For example, to make the rate schedules compatible with what was in the language of the bill. For example, one went from 2.01 to 2.02. So technical changes, and we came to agreement with that. So, Mr. Vice President, I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on sub for House Bill 2570. And
Are
I'm
there
happy
any
to stand for
questions?
questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll hold for final action. Chair recognizes the Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson, on House Bill 2614.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. House Bill 2614, we basically removed the contents of House Bill 2614 and inserted the provisions of House Bill 2517. Basically, what this does is makes an amendment to the advanced voting ballot envelopes. Current law requires that there's a signature block for the advanced voter and a signature block for any person who signs the advanced voting ballot envelope on behalf of another advanced voter when the advanced voter is physically unable to sign the envelope. The bill would add to the requirements for advanced voting envelopes by adding a signature block for the person, if any, who's authorized by the advanced voter to deliver advanced voting ballot to the county election office, add a designated block on that envelope for the person who's authorized by the advanced voter to deliver the advanced voting ballot to the county election office to print such person's name. So anybody who's going to deliver that on behalf of someone else has to print their name on the ballot envelope, and also adds a statement to be printed on each of those advanced voting ballots. The information from KSA 25-2437, which shows that it prohibits the transmission or delivery of more than 10 advanced voting ballots by any one person. The bill would also require each county election official to record the names of any individual who delivers an advanced voting ballot on behalf of another voter and maintain record of the number of such ballots returned by each individual to the county election office. And if anyone returns more than 10 advanced voting ballots during an election, the county election officer would be required to file a complaint with the Secretary of State and the county or district attorney for the county alleging a violation of KSA 2537. It also adds well, it actually allows for any Campaign Finance Act provisions for basically what it does is allows removing the requirement to include the name of the treasurer of a sponsoring organization on communications advocating for nomination, election, or defeat of a clearly identified candidate. So in other words, with your election literature, you don't have to list your treasurer anymore. You can if you'd like to, but it does not require that. And this would not go into effect until July 1st of 2025, specifically because of the printing of the envelopes. We know that some of the election offices have already printed their advanced voting envelopes. And so that is, January 1st, 2025 is the effective date of House Bill 2614. So with that, I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on House Bill 2614, and I'll stand for questions.
We have heard the explanation. We have heard the motion. Are there any questions? The chair recognizes the Senator from Johnson, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I do have a question for the carrier of the bill.
He will respond.
Thank you. Could you please tell me, Senator, have we had hearings in Fed and State Senate Committee on all of the different bills that are in this CCR?
Senator Thompson?
We had a hearing on the treasurer portion of this, but the other portion came from the House.
Senator
2517.
Senator Holscher?
Great. Thank you so much. I'm very, very uncomfortable with this CCR for that reason and a few others, but there are some conceptual ideas that were added to the bill that were never heard in committee. So we've not had a chance to vet those or ask questions or get input from election officials. Additionally, this alters mail ballot envelopes to add more lines, text, and references to statutes, despite the fact these envelopes are already very crowded with information. Additionally, this says county clerks would have to create a tracking system for who assisted in returning ballots, but it's unclear in this legislation how that would be done. So again, this has a lot of components that haven't even been heard in committee, so I would urge the body to vote no.
Are there other questions? Chair recognizes the senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I do have some questions for the senator from Shawnee.
Please proceed.
So my understanding is this would provide a process for an individual who's returning a advanced ballot to the county election officer. What happens if someone has been asked to drop off an advanced ballot in a drop box? What are the rules at that point?
Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson.
I would imagine they would have to follow they would have to fill out their name as indicated and make sure that they don't do any more than 10. I'm assuming that once the county election official sees that name, they record it, and as long as they're 10 or under, they're going to be 10 or under delivery of those advanced voting ballots, they should be fine.
Senator recognizes Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I think that's my assumption, but I think that the language that was added talks about specifically authorized by the voter to deliver the advanced ballot to the county election office. And if we said, or a ballot box, then we could be sure that these rules would also apply in that case. And I do appreciate that this is asking the county election office to keep track of how many ballots someone brings in to the election office, but there are other ways to deliver ballots. You could put them in a mailbox. So I think this needs a little more work, and I'd also appreciate a no vote. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator from Sidwick, Senator Falscadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Senator from Johnson, if he'll answer a couple of questions.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So in regards to returning the election individual keeping track of those ballots that have come in with that additional signature on it. So right now, if the advanced ballots, they're being counted already by an election worker. So are you saying create another stack to whereas they would keep a tally of those who are now required to add an additional signature on the outside of that envelope, Mr. Vice President?
Senator Thompson.
Yes, Mr. Vice President. All they're doing is, as these advanced ballots, envelopes come in with the ballot in them, it would just have the name of the person who's delivering it. So it should be very clear. If somebody's delivering it on their own or have mailed it in on their own, they wouldn't have to tally that. They would just notice that there's that signature block that requires that the person delivering the ballot put their name on it, have to print it legibly. They would note that. They would make a tally. I'm sure each election office, depending on whether it's a small county or a large county, would develop the process of keeping track of that. But again, this is so that they conform to law that's already in place, which requires that no more than 10 advanced voting ballots be delivered by any one person. Up until now, we've had no way to track that, no way to tell whether or not somebody was violating that law. All this does is give our county election officials a way to make sure that that law is not being violated.
Senator Falscato.
Okay, Mr. Vice President, so just to be clear, understanding already that if a person's in the hospital and you help them fill out their advance ballot on the outside of the envelope, your name would go there, their name would go there, and your signature, and we're gonna print it now as well. Is that correct?
Senator Thompson.
That's correct. They would have to sign it, and the person who is authorized to deliver that ballot would have to also print legibly their name so that the election office would know exactly who delivered that ballot, and that would help them keep track of it clearly, obviously.
Senator Falscato.
Mr. Vice President, so there would be a total of how many lines on the outside of the envelope? And I understand that there's already a signature, and this legislation would now require that you print. So where would your additional signature or printing of your name go if you are also delivering the 10 ballots? Is that 2 on the outside of the envelope? So now there's 2 lines. Are we adding 1 more line or 2 more lines? A total of 3 or 4, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Thompson.
It would be a total of 3 lines. And again, we're giving them, the election officials, until 2025 to implement this, because we know that some advanced voting ballot envelopes have already been printed, and we didn't want to force them to, throw those out, reprint, and take on the financial responsibility of doing so in 2024. So it would be a total of 3 lines, plus the information stating the KSA 25, 24, 37, so that they are very clear that they can only deliver up to 10 ballots. We don't want anybody violating that law, and we want to make sure that they are fully informed. The information is right there on the ballot envelope, so they could sign it, basically acknowledging that, and that's all there is to it.
Senator Falscato.
Mr. Vice President, voting is very, very important to me. And I want it to be clear to our voters. So there could be a situation where you are assisting one fill out that ballot. However, you might mail it back in. You would not be delivering it. So with that, additional signature be required at that time.
Senator
I
Thompson.
don't want to confuse the voters.
Senator Thompson.
In this case, we're talking about the person delivering the ballot. If someone was going to take that ballot from, say, a person in the hospital and drop it into the advanced voting drop box, then yes, they would be the one authorized to do so, and their name would have to be on there.
Senator Falscato.
So, Mr. Vice President, I don't want to belabor this, but I just want people out there listening in that if you just want to assist a disabled person, there are some people that still don't, they sign with a mark. And if, in fact, they are just getting your assistance to fill out that ballot, which they can legally do, they don't need that 3rd signature. They can put a stamp on it and mail it, and the senator who's carrying the legislation is only talking about if you deliver it, then you need to print it, that additional signature to deliver it. That's my understanding. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I do have an additional question as I was hearing information being communicated about this bill. So the requirement is no more than 10 ballots returned by an individual, correct?
Senator Thompson.
By one individual who is transmitting the ballot on behalf of someone else, correct?
Senator Holzer?
Do we get into any issues in terms of mailmen, postal workers delivering ballots, or clarification of which individuals are doing this?
Senator Thompson?
No. No, this would be the person authorized by the voter to deliver that advanced voting ballot. So the postal office would have no, unless you were to authorize your postal worker, who would then have to comply by filling out his name. But that's getting into all sorts of theoretical territory.
Senator Holzer?
Yeah, I mean, again, yes, there are lots of issues in this bill, and that is another area that really hasn't been explored. So again, had we had the ability to completely hear the components to this bill, maybe it would have been a little bit more vetted and in a little bit better shape. And as I sit down, I'm going to make sure I do not get caught up on my cords here. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from Wyandotte, Senator Petty.
Thank you. And this is a question for the senator from Johnson. You mentioned earlier that House Bill 2517 had been inserted into 2614. And I have a couple of questions. One, when you mentioned 2517, is that the bill as it was introduced on the House side, or just a portion of that bill?
Senator Thompson?
House Bill 2517 was inserted into this shell, basically. We removed the contents of 2614, put 2517 into this, and it was 2517 from the House as introduced.
Senator Petty?
And if I'm following along, this 2517 that actually had a hearing never passed out of committee. Would that be correct?
Senator Thompson?
I would need to check on that.
Well, in fact, this bill was stricken from the calendar on the House side.
Committee report recommending bill be passed by Committee on Elections on February 7th, stricken from the calendar by Rule 1507, February 23rd.
So that would be correct, that this bill never did pass out of committee.
It was recommended to be passed by the Committee on Elections, but stricken from the calendar.
Okay.
So I'm assuming it came out of committee, but then never was debated on the floor.
Okay, if I'm looking, you mentioned one part of this bill, and that was about not having to list the treasurer, but it does appear that this bill has multiple pieces in it, and so I'm going to ask a question about that very thing. Does this bill, and maybe I'm not reading this correctly, but does this bill also change the reporting for amounts of contributions?
Senator Thompson?
No, it does not. All it does is change the requirement to you can list your treasurer or not list your treasurer. That's the only change it made.
Senator Petty?
So when it says the provisions of this subparagraph requiring the disclosure of the name of an individual shall not apply to individuals making expenditures in an aggregate amount of less than $2,500 within a calendar year, that's not a change?
Senator Thompson?
That is not in this conference committee report.
That's in this bill. You said this, the bill as a whole was inserted into 2614. That is in this bill.
Senator Petty, please direct your eyes towards the chair.
Sorry. Thank you for that correction for me.
The only, I'm sorry.
Senator Thompson?
Thank you. No, what you're looking at is current law. All we're doing in this in 2517 is striking the requirement for the treasurer to be listed. Everything else is current law.
Senator Petty?
If Thank you for that clarification. So on page 2, then, when it strikes letter D, that doesn't pertain to the disclosure of the name of an individual shall not apply. It says the provisions of this subparagraph, and it requiring that, and it strikes D, which was going back to D, which is right above. I'm just asking for your interpretation, for your information on that, so I can better understand this.
Senator Thompson?
I am reading, Mr. Vice President, very quickly here. If we could just indulge the body for a second. Because all we're doing in provisions requiring disclosure of, that is current law provision. Yeah, that is current law. In fact, just striking D, what is being referred to is already in subsection D. So it's just removing the redundant D from that statute. So it does not affect those reporting requirements at all.
Senator Petty?
Thank you for that interpretation. I still am not quite clear on that disclosure about if it's changing that amount. I would ask the senator from Johnson about, it appears that right now that in front of the Kansas Supreme Court is the issue of 10 ballot assistant limits as to whether that's going to be ruled as being potentially unconstitutional, and would this be dealing with the same thing?
Senator Thompson?
If you're referring to contribution limits, there's nothing that refers to that in this bill whatsoever. With regard to the 10 ballot rule, or the limit of delivering 10 different ballots, I don't believe that's been ruled on by the Supreme Court. We can't speculate on that. We are trying to make policy to make sure that people do not violate current law, which is the policy for elections are set by the legislature. The Supreme Court overruling something like that would be them stepping out of their lane, which they unfortunately have a propensity of doing anyhow, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Petty?
Thank you. I think that is a personal opinion there, since legislation is passed and any citizen in Kansas that feels affronted can actually bring cause concerning any piece of legislation. We've seen that whether it's dealing with elections or whether it's dealing with school finance, or whether it's dealing with bodily autonomy. We've seen that come forward, and we've seen rulings often against legislation that we've passed, which violates personal rights of Kansans. So I'm just asking, I mean, right now there is a case before the Kansas Supreme Court on this very issue about 10 ballots assistance limit, which is going to be ruled on any day, and it could potentially be found as unconstitutional. So it seems that we are dealing with something in a piece of legislation to pass again what now the Supreme Court in Kansas may rule as being unconstitutional. I do not need a response.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we will hold for final action.
Mr. Vice President.
Excuse me. The chair recognizes the senator from Douglas, Senator Prigger.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I understand this is my second time to get up. So I had one other question when we talked about striking the word treasurer from a requirement for advertisements. Would most of these organizations have a chairperson, or is there any requirement that they do have a chairperson?
Senator Thompson.
In this, the requirement for listing the chairperson does not change. This is just the requirement for listing the treasurer on that literature, and you can opt to do so, or you don't have to in this case if this bill passes.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My question was whether a sponsoring organization must have a chairperson, because the way it reads right now, it says a chairperson or treasurer. It doesn't say chairperson and treasurer. If it said chairperson and treasurer, then you could strike the words and treasurer, and you would only be asking for the chairperson. My concern is sponsoring organizations that may have been organized without a chairperson, but might have been organized with a treasurer.
Senator Thompson.
All we are striking is a treasurer requirement. That's it. So if there's a chairman and the requirement exists for them to be listed, they shall be listed. But the treasurer does not have to.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. My question again was, is a sponsoring organization required to have a chairperson? And where would I find that in our statutes?
Senator Thompson.
You are required to have a chairperson, and they are required to be listed.
As the chairperson?
Senator Thompson.
As the chairperson, as required by current law.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. That was my question. I'll tell you a story about when I ran years ago at some other time.
Seeing no other questions, we will hold for final action before recessing. I recognize the senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson, on House Bill 2618.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. House Bill 2618 actually is two different bills. We have 2618, which passed this body 29-9, and it is a false representation of election official. All this does was clarifies that the intent to cause another person to believe they are engaging with an election official, it just clarifies that law and makes it a little bit easier for our prosecutors to prosecute that particular statute. Nothing else changes, it just clarifies that section. The other portion of this bill, we inserted Senate Bill 367, And that bill would add that no governmental agency, including but not limited to any election official, could knowingly accept or expend any monies directly or indirectly from the federal government except as provided in acts of appropriation or as otherwise provided by state law. With that, I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on HB 2618, and I'll stand for questions.
You have heard the explanation and the motion. Are there questions? The chair recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I do have a question. My understanding is this bill states that Kansas cannot accept federal money for elections except as provided in any acts of appropriation or as otherwise provided by state law. In light of that, what would have happened during the pandemic in regard to the emergency election money we received?
Senator Thompson.
It would have no impact on that money whatsoever. It was appropriated as such by Congress and therefore able to expend that in the state.
Senator Holscher.
That is a concern because experts in law who have reviewed this believe that this bill would have prevented us from receiving that money during the pandemic. Additionally, there are other pieces of this bill that are a concern. It does not address a specific problem because it's based on information from an out-of-state group. Once again, Opportunity Solutions Project. And again, like I said, one of the big pieces here is that blocking of the aid. This doesn't resolve the lawsuit. The information that's in the language that's in 2618 does nothing to address that problem. It does not save the state money, and just the difficulties of, or the complexities of these different components put together does not address any core issue here and actually has some very concerning effects if implemented. So I urge the body to vote no.
Senator Thompson, do you care to opine?
Very, very briefly, basically, this is not just happening in Kansas, it's happening nationwide. Federal agencies are using discretionary funds in various states at the local agencies or the local federal agency offices for uses for different types of election use. And it is not appropriated by Congress, therefore it is not lawful for it to be used as such. And all this is trying to do is to address that problem because the state legislature does set the policy for elections and any type of election activity. And therefore, any federal money that comes to us that's appropriated for elections we can use. And anything that it utilized passes through the state for authorization. Everything else should be excluded, and that's all this bill does.
We will hold for final action. Now, before recessing, are there announcements? Senator from Johnson, Senator Olson.
I know we're preparing to vote here. The only comment I have, we're rolling up to 10 o'clock here. We're moving slow today. I don't plan to be on the road all night, and I know there's other members. I hope we're not going to be here all night. At the rate we're going slow. This is something we can, I definitely want to vote on this block of bills, but I don't want to see us go and recess and caucus and be here 2 more hours. We got a lot of staff that's going to be here later than us, and I would hope that we wouldn't want to put. There's some senators going to drive a long ways tonight, not put their life in danger. So I hope after voting on these bills, we'd think about recess until tomorrow and start back up. There's no work here that needs to be done that can't be done tomorrow or when we come back and veto. We took a slow start this year, and so I would hope we wouldn't go past that. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Now, the next order of business is final action, and we're now ready for final action. On this roll call, we will take the following. The conference committee reports on House sub for Senate Bill 387, Senate Bill 18, Senate Bill 384, Senate Bill 356, House sub for Senate Bill 73, House Bill 2614, House Bill 2618, sub for House Bill 2570, and House Bill 2562. The clerk will read the titles.
House substitute for Senate Bill number 387, an act concerning education. Senate Bill number 18, an act concerning insurance. Senate Bill number 384, an act concerning health and health care. Senate Bill number 356, an act concerning insurance. House substitute for Senate Bill number 73, an act concerning children and minors. House Bill number 2614, an act concerning administrative rules and regulations. House Bill number 2618, an act concerning elections. Substitute for House Bill number 2570, an act concerning employment and security law. And House Bill number 2562, an act concerning securities.
The clerk will call the roll.
Alley. Baumgardner. Billinger. Blasey. Bowers. Clays. Corson. Dietrich. Dahl. Erickson. Fag. Faust Goudot. Francisco. Gossage. Haley.
7. Pass on 384. No on 73. No on 2614. No on 2618. Aye on the remainder.
Holland. Olsher. Kirshen. Cluse. Longmine. Masterson. McGinn. Olson. O'Shea. Peck, Peterson, Petty, Pittman, Pyle, Ready, Reichman, Schallenberger, Steffen, Straub, Sykes, Thompson, Tyson, Ware,
No. 614. No. 618.
Warren, Wilborn,
Has every senator had the opportunity to vote? Chair recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I meant to vote aye on Senate Bill 73. Thank you.
Duly noted. Chair recognizes Senator from Johnson, Senator Gossage.
Passed to aye on 387.
Are there any other, is there any explanation of votes? Chair recognizes Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I vote no on Senate Bill 387 because most of what is in this bill has not thoroughly been vetted by the Committee on Education. 6 of the 7 bills, to be exact. While I applaud some provisions in this bill that hold the Board of Education accountable to state law that would prioritize our at-risk students, I cannot support major changes to K-12 finance while there is universal opposition back home. Thank you.
Would you like to hear a word spread across the journal? No. The chair recognizes Senator from Reno, Senator Steffen.
Thank you. I've got 2 for you. We'll start out with, I voted no on SB 387 because our state's education funding continues to be based on a Supreme Court ruling that is unconstitutional and a gross overreach of the judicial branch. Public education is a dramatic overspend for the product received. Until public education is exposed to competition via school choice, it will continue to underachieve. School choice with funding traveling with the student is key to the ultimate success of all Kansas students.
Would you like your words spread across the journal?
Please.
Duly noted.
May I proceed with the second?
You may.
Thank you. I voted yes on HB 2614 and 2618 because safe and secure elections are a goal I embrace and strive for. Also, I clearly understand that this goal is achieved intentionally and not achieved intentionally. Thank you.
Senator from Lynn, Senator Tyson, would you restate your vote, please? Does any senator wish to change their votes? The clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. "32 having voted in favor, 7 against, Senate Bill 18. 35 having voted in favor and 4 against, Senate Bill 73. 38 having voted in favor and 1 against, Senate Bill 356. 33 having voted in favor and 5 against, Senate Bill 384. 38 having voted in favor and 1 against, House Bill 2562. 38 having voted in favor and 1 against, House Bill 2570. 26 having voted in favor and 3 against, 2614. And 26 having voted in favor and 13 against on House Bill 2618. These measures, having received the required constitutional majority, are hereby declared passed. 12 having voted in favor and 26 against Senate Bill 387, the measure is lost. Before recessing, are there announcements? Seeing none, the chair recognizes the Majority Leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Republicans will caucus in room 548 upon recess. And I yield to the Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Senate Democrats will caucus in room 287 North. Upon recess, I yield back to the Senator from Cali.
Majority Leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I move the Senate recess to the sound of the gavel.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Senate is recessed.
Messages from the House. Clerk will read. Yeah, you're good.
The House adopts the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 14. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 115. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on House substitute for Senate Bill 271. The House adopts the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 423. The House adopts the Conference Committee report to agree to disagree on Senate substitute for House Bill 2070 and has appointed Representatives Humphreys, Lewis, and Osmond as second conferees on the part of the House.
For an announcement, Chair recognizes Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate and House Education will meet at 10:30 and 159 South on Senate Bill 19. Thank you.
Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have two motions I'm going to make here for the Senate. One is to reconsider the vote we took here on Senate Bill 387. We know we got to pass the school finance bill. And then on my next motion, we'll be asking the Senate to appoint a new conference committee so they can go back and take another look. So my first motion, Mr. President, is having voted on the prevailing side, I move the Senate reconsider its action on Senate Bill 387.
For the motion, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Division's been requested. All those in favor, please stand. You may be seated. All opposed, please stand. On a vote of 23 in favor, 9 opposed, motion carries. We're back on the report. Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate not adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 387 and that a new conference committee be appointed.
For the motion, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. For conferees on part of the Senate, Chair appoints Senator from Miami, Senator Baumgartner, Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Erickson, Senator from Johnson, Senator Sykes. Conference committee reports, Chair recognizes the Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson on Senate Bill 14.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 14, we took the contents of Senate Bill 14 and replaced it with the sub for House Bill 2512 as amended by the House Committee of the Whole, which passed the House 97-23, and added also House Bill 2513, contents of which were passed in Senate Bill 209 by this body in 2023, but vetoed by the governor. Basically, here's the summary of the contents. Effective July of this year, every county election officer is required to provide at least 4 hours of advanced in-person voting on the Saturday before the election. All ballots cast by advance in-person voting must be delivered to the county election office by noon Monday. The county election officer may allow such ballots to be delivered or cast on the Saturday or Sunday preceding the election. They will close things down, though, for Monday voting so that the election offices can reset and get ready for the actual election day on Tuesday. The only exception would be that anyone who wanted to vote on that Monday, because they had no other option for voting, could go to the election office and on a case-by-case basis be allowed to vote. Let's say some trucker was out on the road, couldn't do the advance voting, couldn't be here on election day. They could stop into the election office and make the case for their ability to vote that day. Then the rest of the contents would be effective January 1st of 2025. And that would be the elimination of the 3-day grace period. So all ballots, advanced voting ballots, mail-in ballots shall be received by 7 p.m. on the date of the election. In-person voting of advanced ballots must occur prior to 7 p.m. Sunday before the election, except for good cause. I guess that portion, the good cause, doesn't kick in until January 2025. I misspoke on that before. Unless an earlier date is designated by the county election official, Deadlines for requesting advance ballot applications are to be mailed out, would be 14 days prior to the election. Currently, it's 7 days. And that's to account for the problems we have at the post office. In other words, it gives them an extra 7 days to get their mail-in ballots in. Advanced voting ballots may be sent by the county election officer now 22 days before an election, not 20 days, so it gives them an extra 2 days. Voter registration deadline is changed from 20 days preceding an election to 22 days preceding an election. Applications from voter registration agencies in the division vehicles shall be 23 days, which is now 21 days. So it adds a couple of days of advanced voting in addition to the up to 22 days, and then shuts down the all acceptance of ballots 7 p.m. on Election Day. And with that, I move that the Senate adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 14, and I will stand for questions.
For the motion, and we're open for questions. Senator Johnson, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. President. Why is there, if you would stand for a question, please, why is there the change to move back voter registration, that deadline?
Senator Johnson, Senator Thompson.
To conform with the 22 days. So in other words, we're giving you an advance, 22 days of advance in-person voting now, so you can't have voter registration after that's begun. So we move it back to the 23rd day before election. So you have to register prior to the advance voting.
Senator Holscher.
A follow-up question then, what does this do to voting on Mondays in counties like Johnson County, I believe Wyandotte, Sedgwick have voting until noon on Monday, the day before Election Day?
Senator Thompson.
There would be none, but we've added the requirement there be at least 4 hours of advance voting on Saturday, at least 4 hours on that Saturday beforehand. And then the reason they shut it down on Monday would be so the election offices could get ready for the actual election on Tuesday. A lot of times they have a lot of election workers who are working on Monday, and it's a fast turnaround time, so it gives them a little time to catch a breather before that Tuesday. And again, on a case-by-case basis, someone could go to the election office and say, this is my only opportunity to vote, make the case to the election officer, and if they decide that is a valid reason, they would allow them to vote.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you for answering that. I do have concerns with so many provisions of this CCR, and that is one of the areas that is a concern. If you were in Johnson County, those 4 hours are very critical of voting on Monday. In fact, the turnout has been almost as high as on the first day of in-person voting. So that type of a change can be very punitive to people who typically go voting on Monday. Additionally, the moving back the voter registration deadline is another area that is concerning because, again, it's less time when potential voters can register. We had several opponents to all of the pieces that were put in to this CCR, and because of that, I would urge the body to vote no.
Further questions for the Senator from Johnson? Senator from Douglas, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a question for the Senator from Johnson. So he explained that a county election officer may allow in-person voting until noon on Monday for good cause. Why would we want to have the election officer be the one who determines whether an individual can vote or not?
Senator Johnson, Senator Thompson.
Because in this case, we are not allowing the voting on Monday except for a case-by-case basis. So someone would have, the intent is we take away those 4 hours on Monday, but we add at least 4 hours on the Saturday prior to the election, so that we're not losing any time there. But that just, on that Monday, is just a case-by-case basis for somebody who has really no other option to vote. Now we're gonna add 2 days on the front end of the advanced voting. So they're going to get an additional 2 days on the front end of this to compensate for that, losing that 4 hours on Monday. And that 4 hours on Monday, it's not an actual loss because we're adding the requirement of 4 hours on the Saturday before. So really, we're adding 2.5 days of voting on the front end. And then if you can't vote in those 22 days or get your mail-in ballot in within the time frame, and that is your only option, you can't vote on Election Day. I can't imagine what cases there would be. It shouldn't be many. The election officer could make that decision, and the election officer should be the one to make that decision. They would have to just appeal to the election officer and make their case. I can't imagine you could open that up to an election worker because they may or may not be qualified or understand the law, whereas the election official should.
Senator from Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm really focusing on this question of giving a county election officer the ability to say, yes, you can vote, or no, you can't vote. I do understand there may be good cause. I have been, on occasion, asked to vote at a different, or not to vote, to work as a poll worker at a different location from the one I was previously assigned or from the one I vote at because they need a supervising judge someplace else. And so you may just find out that someone is sick and needs that replacement, and you are not then going to be able to vote in person on Tuesday. But this idea that we would say election officers are going to be the ones that decide who gets to vote and who doesn't get to vote at a particular time, I find very disturbing. I think there need to be rules about voting. They need to be applied equally. And in this case, if someone is saying, I'm not going to be able to vote on Tuesday, then we really are saying some people can vote, some people can't. I don't think that belongs in our statutes.
Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Falsquito.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I know that Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson, has been working really hard on a lot of conference committees. So, this is an important issue of voting rights again. So, since we've eliminated the 3-day grace period, and with that elimination, Mr. President, I'm hoping that the Secretary of State's office will do some public service announcements, get that information out to the voters in Kansas to let them know that they no longer have a 3-day grace period. And so with that 2 days now in the front of the election, are we still requiring, or does it matter if the envelopes are postmarked, the advance ballots being returned to the election office if the postmark is required?
Senator from Johnson.
Bear in mind, first of all, that none of this 3-day grace period elimination doesn't kick in until 2025. And then on Election Day, if they've got those ballots in hand, the problem right now is with all these mail processing centers in remote areas, they're using barcodes, they're not always postmarking them, and so relying on a postmark becomes problematic. And so we have to say, if that ballot has been received by the election office by 7 p.m. on Election Day, it's valid. Anything after that, it's not. Because in some cases here recently, because some election offices are actually throwing out ballots because they can't verify they received it within that 3-day grace period time because there are no postmarks. So in a lot of ways, having that as the benchmark, the postmark as the benchmark, we are actually disenfranchising more voters in that way. This way, in 2025, when this 3-day grace period goes away, I'm certain election offices, as I do in Johnson County, receive information from them all the time. We'll make sure people understand that. And it's not really up to the Secretary of State's office as much as it is to the county election officials. I know in Johnson County, we get all sorts of information from them. Smaller counties, it may be a little bit more difficult, but they're not dealing with as big a population. Hopefully that answers it, Mr. President.
Senator from Sedgwick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do know that all 105 counties, they do things a little differently. I know here in Shawnee County, when they mail your advance ballot out, they mail a stamp with it. They mail a stamped envelope. They don't do that in Sedgwick County in Wichita, where I live. So I understand that it's not it should be the Secretary of State's office that would oversee if we are putting something within the law, within policy and procedure that must be done across the state. The Secretary of State's office is the overseer of that particular issue. Now, if we were leaving this up to each local county to say, you need a signature here, there, but you're putting it in state law. So I do, Mr. President, think that the Secretary of State's office could advise those local election offices to do this in a way that it's uniformity, Mr. President. But again, I will be opposing the legislation, but I do appreciate that it won't kick into effect until 2025. Thank you.
Senator from Lynn, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the carrier of the CCR stand for question?
He is.
Thank you. So I appreciate the work. I know the senator has put a lot of time and effort into this, but I'd like to have a clear understanding. So what this legislation would do is allow individuals to register to vote when the polls are open. Is that correct?
Senator from Johnson.
No, that's why we move it back 23 days prior to the election, so that they would have to be fully registered on the day before advance voting began, which is 22 days from the election.
Senator from Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does that put it back on a Saturday or a Sunday?
Senator from Johnson.
You're asking me at this late hour for some math problems. I would have to take a look at that. It would be.
I could explain.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I can explain why I asked the question. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt. So if it puts it on a Saturday or Sunday, then the Secretary of State will most likely keep that open until Monday, and they begin the voting on a Monday. So there would inadvertently be an overlap. And I don't think that's what we want to do, if I understand correctly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm hoping that we make sure that that is not the case before we move forward on this legislation.
Any further questions? Seeing none, Senator from Johnson, you have any closing remarks?
No, Mr. No,
we'll hold for final action. Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren on Senate Bill 115.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 115.
Please explain.
Senate Bill 115, you'll remember, will sound familiar to you. It enacts into statute the Office of Child Advocate. This body had passed out last session with a vote of 39-0, a bill that established the Office of Child Advocate, and it ran into some difficulties with our colleagues across the rotunda last session, but we worked diligently this year and we have a bill to present. It has already passed the House, the conference committee report did, with a vote of 117-3. And let me tell you what it does. First of all, remember, we're working to keep the Office of Child Advocate an independent agency. So the Child Advocate has the independence to take a look at the child welfare system and the Department of Children and Families when there are complaints made about, hey, the system is not serving this child has fallen through the cracks, if you will, and we need someone, an outside independent party, to take a look at that. So that's what this office does. And it does so by, first of all, it requires that the child advocate have certain qualifications. You have to have years of experience either in the child welfare system, providing legal services to children and family, and yet you have to be independent of those departments or contractors or agencies for at least 12 months prior to you being considered to be appointed as the child advocate or otherwise working in the office. Now, how do we decide who the child advocate is? If you'll remember, the Senate position was the governor appoint, subject to Senate confirmation, and the House position was creating a 15-member advisory board that would then take a look at that. And we were able to retain the Senate position, and so it would be a governor-appointed position subject to Senate confirmation. What we also did is we wanted to make sure that the child advocate wasn't tied to politics, so there's a prohibition on when selecting the child advocate, political affiliation shall not be considered. And in addition, we created the term of the child advocate shall be 5 years, not 4 years so that it would align with any governor term, but 5 years to, again, be independent also of any tied to any elections or things like that. So, and would be appointed so long as the until another one was appointed or confirmed, because we don't want the term to expire and then no child advocate is serving. So with that, we also define child, so anyone who's under 18 and involved in the child in need of care system, and some of the other things, subpoena power. The Senate position had subpoena power in it for the child advocate. The House position did not. And we did retain the Senate position and kept subpoena power for the child advocate in, with some guardrails. We always like, as a legislative body, to provide some guardrails, and we put that into the conference committee report. Also reporting to the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Child Welfare and Foster Care, as well as the Senate Standing Committee on Judiciary. So we would have some reporting done there as well. Those are kind of the highlights there, and I'll stand for any questions.
There are questions for the Senator from Johnson. Senator from Johnson, Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to take 20 seconds and say I think this is a real significant accomplishment, and I very much appreciate the work of the Senate Judiciary Chair in shepherding this through the process from our side. This is an issue that people have been talking to me about since well before I got elected, and I've been here for 4 years. So I just wanted to pause and say that I think this is a very significant piece of legislation. I think we should all be proud of it. Again, I'm very proud of how the Senate side was represented in the conference committee process, and I'm hopeful that the body will pass this, hopefully very overwhelmingly, because it's something that we've wanted and worked towards for a number of years to improve the child welfare system in Kansas. And so I just want to take a second and just acknowledge that. I think this is a very important day and a big accomplishment, and a lot of people deserve credit for it. So thank you.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, we will hold for final action. We're passing over Senate Bill 271. We now go to Senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine on SB 423.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 423 is a combination of 4 bills, 3 of which passed our body by a wide margin. It was the power of the commissioner to reduce the number of boards members on 16 different boards, the ability to reduce fees, and remove auto club from the definition of a person. The House asked us to include House Bill 2834, which was moving the state employee health plan to the insurance department. I didn't get a lot of warm fuzzy in conference and caucus on that. So, Mr. President, I'm going to make a motion that the Senate not adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 423 and a new conference committee be appointed.
Motion's in order. You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. As third conferees on part of the Senate, Chair appoints the senator from Lyon, Senator Longbine, senator from Butler, Senator Fagg, and senator from Leavenworth, Senator Pittman. Holster, senator from Johnson, Senator Holster, as third conferees on part of the Senate. We're now ready for final
Point
action.
of order. Oh, sorry.
All right, what's your point?
Question on procedure. They finished their motion, and there is a conflict. The Secretary of State's office told somebody that since it lands on a Sunday, they would allow people to register on Monday, so we would have the polls open and the registration open for one day. I think that's a problem, and I think it's worth sending back to committee to get that fixed. So
that's a point of information, number one.
Okay,
Two,
sorry about that.
Are you addressing one of the bills that we've concluded on?
yes, 14.
Yeah, we're
So
done
my
with that.
question
We're on final action.
Okay. So we just vote no then?
If you choose to vote no, that's in order. We are now on final action. And on this roll call, we'll take the following: the two conference committee reports, Senate Bill 14 and Senate Bill 115. Clerk will read the titles.
Senate Bill number 14, an act concerning insurance, and Senate Bill number 115, an act concerning adoption.
Clerk will call the roll.
Alley. Baumgardner. Billinger. Lazy. Bowers. Glaze. Corson. Dietrich. Dahl.
No on 14, aye on the remainder.
Erickson. Fagg. Fascudo. Francisco. Gossage. Haley. Holland. Holscher. Kirshen. Cluse. Longbine. Masterson. McGinn. Olson. O'Shea. Peck. Peterson. Petty. Pittman. Isle. Ready. Reichman. Schallenberger. Steffen. Straub. Sykes. Thompson. Tyson. Ware. Warren. Wilborn.
Has every senator had an opportunity to vote? Does any senator wish to explain their vote? Anyone senator wish to change their vote? Seeing none, clerk will close the roll, tally the vote.
Mr. President,
Senator from Lynn,
explanation of vote,
please proceed.
but you've closed the roll. Is
I've
that-
closed the roll, but I'll let you explain.
Okay, hopefully. So I do see a conflict with allowing a voter registration and voting to occur the same day in Kansas. We've been very meticulous on that process, and therefore I vote no on Senate Bill 14, CCR 14.
Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm going to break you.
Okay.
We have closed the roll, but since I allowed it for Senator from Lynn, I'm going to allow it from you. But normally, once the roll has closed, we've taken explanation and we've taken changes. This is somewhat out of order, but I'll allow it.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. President. Basically, I vote aye on Senate Bill 14. It is a good bill. I do believe that conflict is more of a policy of the Secretary of State than following the actual statute. If a deadline is set 23 days before, you can't go 22 days before. And therefore, voting 23 or registering 23 days or 22 days before an election would be in conflict with the statute, and the Secretary of State would be violating the statute. And therefore, I think Senate Bill 14 does not have the conflict, and I would challenge the Secretary of State's policy on that. Thank you, Mr. President.
36 having voted in favor and 3 opposed to the passage of Senate Bill 115. This measure, having reached its constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed. 20 having voted in favor and 19 opposed to the passage of Senate Bill 14. This measure is failed. Before adjourning, are there announcements?
Mr. President.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you. Having voted on the prevailing side, I move that the Senate reconsider its actions on SB 14.
Motion's in order. Non-debatable. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. We're now back on Senate Bill 14. That was the final action. Do we want to we recast the vote? At this point, we need to not adopt the conference room report and send it back. Senator from Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate not adopt the conference committee report on SB 387, or I'm sorry, reading the wrong script, Senate Bill 14, and that a new conference committee report be appointed.
Heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. As third conference on part of the Senate, Chair appoints the Senator from Johnson, Senator Thompson, Senator from Shawnee, Senator Cluse, Senator from Sedgwick, Senator Fauskido. Before adjourning, are there announcements? Senator from Johnson, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Judiciary and House Corrections and Juvenile Justice will meet tomorrow at 9 a.m., 382 North on all bills in conference. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Seeing none, Chair recognizes the Majority Leader from Cali, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate adjourn until 10 a.m. on Friday, April 5th, 2024.
For the motion, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senate's adjourned.